RNZ News at 4. Good afternoon, I'm Marama Tipole. The government is about to announce its decision over lockdown levels. We'll cross live to the Beehive for the media conference when it gets underway shortly. It has already been signalled that Auckland is likely to remain at level 4 a little longer, but the figures for the latest number of infections have already been released. There are 35 new community cases today. 33 are in Auckland and 2 are in Wellington. All are now in managed isolation. There are now 107 infections in the current outbreak. Meanwhile, the ACT Party says Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has suspended Parliament for at least a week. ACT leader David Seymour says at the very least the Epidemic Response Committee should have been brought back into operation. He claims there will be little accountability for the current lockdown. More details are expected from the press conference shortly. There's been a huge increase today in the number of people a COVID-infected person has come into contact with in the community. As of 8 o'clock this morning, the number has increased by just over 50% in a single day to more than 13,000, with more contacts expected to be confirmed today. The Ministry of Health describes most of the contacts as close. However, so far, only half have been reached by public health staff and told to self-isolate, and only 42% have had a test. There are now more than 280 locations of interest. Of these, 11 are in Wellington, a few are scattered across the North Island, and the rest are in Auckland. There are also 2 flights of interest between Auckland and Wellington. A church in central Auckland says it's good news that close contacts of a family tested positive for COVID-19 has returned negative results so far. The Church of Christ in Mount Roskill has been listed as a place of interest because 4 family members tested positive. Its secretary, Michael Humphreys, says about 500 people who attended the church might have been exposed to the virus. He's calling for people to look out for each other and anyone who needs help to get in touch with the church. It's one of 3 churches in Auckland where there are positive cases. The other 2 are Central Auckland Church of Christ in Freeman's Bay and Samoan Assembly of God Church in Mangere. An 11th place of interest has been added to the list for Wellington. It's the mobile petrol station on Johnsonville Road. The Ministry of Health says anyone at that location on Tuesday the 17th of August between 8:20pm and 8:35pm should monitor themselves for symptoms for 14 days. 4 people were arrested in Northland over the weekend for breaching lockdown rules. An 18-year-old man and a 26-year-old woman were arrested in Pukekohe on Sunday morning after officers found them asleep in a car. Officers found methamphetamine, cash and a machete in the vehicle. Meanwhile, police also visited a house in Kaitaia after receiving reports that many people were coming and going. Officers found drug paraphernalia, cannabis, methamphetamine and cash. A 48-year-old man and 36-year-old woman face a number of drug-related charges. Nationwide, 29 people have been charged with 33 offences related to breaking the lockdown rules since level 4 came into effect. However, the Police Commissioner Andrew Costa says compliance is generally good. Christchurch City Mission's food bank has seen demand skyrocket by 200% during the level 4 lockdown. City Missioner Matthew Mark says the demand for food today has shot up 200% compared to a week ago. He says the mission is also interacting as many as 140 families a day. The Canterbury Mayoral Forum has formally requested a pause to the 3 waters reform process. The reforms would see the management of storm, drinking and wastewater for all councils moved to regional entities. Chair of the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, Selwyn District Mayor Sam Broughton, says the group has serious concerns about what he says is the reform's short time frame. He says it should be paused immediately and only be lifted when Taumata Arawai, the new water service regulator, is properly established. The US Vice President Kamala Harris is in Singapore as part of a trip to Southeast Asia aimed at countering China's growing influence. She'll meet Singapore's leaders, visit the Changi Naval Base and tour the USS Tulsa, a new US Navy warship. Ms Harris is expected to address US concerns about Beijing's claim to disputed parts of the South China Sea. That's the news.
I'm sure you're getting lots of questions. What are people asking you and what are their concerns right now?
The biggest request is, can we please have a pop-up station at Linfield College?
Have you been out to have your first test?
I have had my first test.
Yeah, and what was your experience like?
I turned up 3 minutes before the test was due to happen, and I walked out 2 minutes later. That is not something that has been shared by our community, so I am embarrassed to have had such an easy swing of things.
Checkpoint with me, Lisa Owen, 5 o'clock weekday evening.
And we cross now to the media conference.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon, everyone. Cabinet met this afternoon to confirm our plan to stamp out the Delta outbreak we're currently experiencing. As you might have already heard, there are 35 new cases reported today, 33 in Auckland and 2 in Wellington, bringing the outbreak to 107 cases in total. 6 days into the outbreak, we are building a picture of Delta's spread. We have identified the source of the outbreak, a returnee from New South Wales, who was briefly at the Crowne Plaza on the 7th and 8th of August before testing positive and being transferred to quarantine at the Jet Park. In recent days, we have retested all staff at both the Crowne Plaza and Jet Park. To date, this has given us no further clues. We'll continue, though, with that source investigation and update you as we go. We have processed 154,439 tests across New Zealand in the past 6 days, a record amount of testing for a 6-day period by quite some way, equating to about 3% of the population. While we're seeing high case numbers at the moment and will continue to for the coming days, the number of tests does provide some reassurance that we're finding cases because we are looking broadly. In Auckland, that is even greater, 108,000 tests taken, a good representative sample of the population of Auckland. To everyone who has turned out to be tested, thank you. I know for many, you waited many hours in queues, so your perseverance is greatly appreciated by the entire team. The additional stations that we've set up are making a difference now too, and wait times are starting to come down. We've also undertaken extensive wastewater testing, which to date has returned positive results for sites in Auckland and Wellington only. So while we're starting to build a picture of Delta's spread, there remain a number of unanswered questions. And with Delta, more certainty is needed. In his recent report to the government, Professor Sir David Skeggs said the Delta variant will be more difficult to control by testing and contact tracing alone. And we're already seeing that. That's why our move into an immediate lockdown was so important. Delta had a head start on us, and we needed to catch up as quickly as we could. You can see that head start in our transmission rate, or the number of people that on average each case is passing COVID-19 onto. Early estimates suggest that number may be 6 or higher. You may recall from previous outbreaks, this number needs to be less than 1 in order for the virus to be stamped out. So we have some way to go yet. As a result of the head start Delta had, and the fact that it does move rapidly and effectively, we have more than 320 locations of interest. Our more cautious approach to these locations means we also have over 13,000 contacts recorded, far more than we've had in other outbreaks, but deliberately so. That does mean that our data collection for each of those sites is different too. In the past, if we had a large event like an awards evening, we would assess all the people a case likely had contact with and treat those as our most at-risk individuals. Now, Delta and our more cautious approach means we are treating all those in attendance with caution and asking them to isolate and be tested. This approach does present some challenges though, so we won't always have the same certainty that we've reached all those that we need to. Level 4 does help us overcome this issue. There are some additional reasons why this alert level remains important. Firstly, with the head start Delta had, it did manage to create contacts all over the country. This heat map shows the location of our known contacts. And as you can see, they are certainly not isolated to one part of New Zealand. As I said, these are also our known contacts. For some of the very, very large locations of interest, reaching everyone will not always be a perfect process. Caution is required. Secondly, after going into level 4, we allowed people a window to get home, as we've always done. During that grace period, almost 8,000 people flew out of Auckland to get home. That was the right thing to do to allow people to isolate safely. But that means we have, in essence, had only 72 hours, with the exception of some of the movement out of Queenstown and the Inter-Islander, where everyone across the country has stayed put. And the third reason level 4 is important for all of us is because we don't yet believe we've reached the peak of this outbreak, or necessarily the edges of it. You'll recall that we pointed to early modelling suggesting we needed 8 to 10 days before we would hit a peak. We're on roughly day 7. Day 6, so cases may continue to get worse before they get better, and I know we're all prepared for that. That does mean, though, that the safest option for all of us right now is to hold the course for longer. On that basis, Cabinet has decided that all of New Zealand will remain at level 4 for an additional 4 days until 11:59 p.m, Friday, 27 August. This will allow us to have additional data and assurance as to whether the virus has spread from our existing sites and how contained it's likely to be. These settings will be reviewed this Friday, and we'll give you an update in the afternoon. To give you a sense of what we'll be looking for in order to decide whether parts of New Zealand are ready to move down alert levels, we'll be looking to see if any new cases emerge outside of Auckland, whether wastewater results stay negative, and if cases do emerge in other parts of the country, whether or not they are cases that were already in isolation. For those in Auckland, I have different news. You'll see this continues to be the primary location of cases. Here we believe we know enough to say that your time in level 4 needs to be at least that full 14-day cycle that we've used in the past. So Cabinet has decided to give the city that certainty. And to tell you what we already know, Auckland will remain in alert level 4 until 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, 31 August. And we'll review those settings on Monday. In both our cases and the decisions that we've made today, you can see we are still very much in the thick of this outbreak. But I can also tell you that Cabinet and the health team remain confident. Delta has changed the rules of the game, but we've changed our approach too. We've hardened our alert levels, widened our contact tracing, required more mask wearing, and we are testing more people. It is absolutely possible to get on top of this. We just need to keep it up and ensure that we're not in restrictions any longer than we need to be. So here's a reminder of the things we all need to keep doing while we remain at alert level 4. Number 1, stay at home. If you're not an essential worker, you should only be leaving your house for the essentials and some fresh air. If you leave home, please wear a mask. And do remember, there are some people in our disabled community who are not able to wear face coverings and have exemptions from doing so. Please remember to be kind. 2, if you are a contact, isolate. Contacts are the people most likely to have the virus and pass it on. Please stay at home. Get others to do your groceries. Only leave to get a test. If you need support, please do ask for it. 3, wash your hands often with soap, then dry them, and of course, cough into your elbow. And 4, get vaccinated. Now is the time to drive up our vaccination numbers. Over 74% of people aged 40 plus are already booked or vaccinated. But in reality, we need that number to be as close to 100% as possible. Please do it now. If you're not booked in yet, please go to www.bookmyvaccine.nz and do your part for the team to help prevent the need for lockdowns in the future. These rules will be so important. To leave level 4, we need to follow them closely. In line with our own recommendations, as we did last time New Zealand was at level 4, we have temporarily suspended the sitting of Parliament for 1 week on the advice of the Director-General of Health. While, of course, we want to ensure that representatives from across the House have the ability to scrutinise the government at this time, physically bringing MPs from across the country to Parliament does pose risk. That's why for this week we've asked all ministers to make themselves available to appear before Parliament's select committees, which of course have a range of opposition MPs and spokespeople on them, as these committees will continue to meet virtually. That will allow us to balance safety and scrutiny. We'll use the next week to see if there are other enhancements we can make. I would add that these types of alternative arrangements are commonplace around the world as other parliaments manage outbreaks in their countries also. So, to recap, we're currently in level 4. We will all be here until Friday when we review the settings for the country, other than Auckland, who will stay at level 4 until next Tuesday with a review the day prior. This gives us the chance to consider as often as we can whether we are safe to move, depending on where in the country you are. Our plan has worked before, and together we can make it work again, so please stay strong, stay home, and be kind, and let's finish what we started. Before I open up for questions, I have a quick update on Afghanistan. The first group of New Zealand citizens and their families, alongside some other visa holders, have been successfully evacuated from Afghanistan and will arrive in Auckland this afternoon. Due to a range of security and privacy considerations, we'll be not providing any further comment on the number of evacuees as the deployment is ongoing. Of course, at the conclusion of deployment, we will be looking to provide numbers. But I can say that the group were evacuated from Afghanistan to the United Arab Emirates, where arrangements were made for their travel to New Zealand with the help of Australia's Defence Force. They've been transferred to an Air New Zealand commercial flight that is part of our freight scheme. The group will undergo 14 days within a managed isolation facility, just like anyone else entering New Zealand at this time. I know when the time presents itself that New Zealanders will go out of their way to make those who have returned home today feel at home. I do want to thank our partners, Australia, the United Arab Emirates, and the US, who worked on securing the airport, for their continued support in what remains a very difficult situation on the ground. I also want to pass on my thanks to the multiple agencies and personnel working around the clock to ensure the return of our citizens. The window to evacuate people out of Afghanistan is unfortunately very limited. And despite our ongoing efforts, we cannot guarantee we can assist all those who are seeking to evacuate. We are monitoring the situation and continue to work urgently with our international partners for the safe return of New Zealanders and those who have supported New Zealand. Now, happy to take your questions. Jessica.
What data is it giving you for the extra 4 days till Friday for the places outside of Auckland?
Well, it gives us that longer period of time where we know that everyone has been at their homes once we had everyone relocate for that period. It gives us additional data. It gives us additional testing across the known contacts who have been at those locations of interest and who are spread throughout the country. And that gives us a level of reassurance. We'll also be looking at wastewater results, which are dotted throughout all parts of the country, and of course looking to see if we have any new cases, have they been in isolation for their entirety of their infectious period. So that's what we'll be looking for.
On current modelling, is there any way that Auckland could come out before the 31st? And also, I know that we're still 2 weeks out, but what should Auckland anticipate? Is there every possibility that they will be able to go down after the 31st?
Yeah, I'll give Dr. Bloomfield a chance on this one as well, but I think what we're trying to balance at the moment for Auckland is just giving a sense of really what we can see from the outbreak at the moment and realistically when we might expect to see cases peak, but also allowing ourselves to keep checking in to see whether or not there are any alterations we can make. Aucklanders, I think, will see this data and will know that 2 weeks at this point is a given. And so we've said, yes, we absolutely believe we are going to need to go through till next Tuesday. But actually, let's check in again then, see how we're looking, see what the outbreak is doing, and see whether we've reached that peak of the outbreak yet or not. Dr. Bloomfield.
Just one thing to add. So Tuesday will be 2 weeks then in alert level 4 in Auckland, where most of the potential exposure happened before the alert level change came in. If we compare that with the rest of the country, and particularly the South Island, the big exposure events we're concerned about were 2 Saturdays ago. So this Friday will be 14 days since those exposure events that we're particularly concerned about.
Yeah, Gina.
This isn't really a short, sharp lockdown anymore. Are you worried about lockdown fatigue?
Well, actually, I would say relative to what we've seen from other countries, this absolutely is a go hard, go early approach. You know, many other places around the world, you've seen more of a light and long. That's never been New Zealand's take on the way to challenge COVID and get on top of it. So we are still absolutely keeping with that strategy. You'll remember that our go hard, go early strategy when COVID first entered our shores looked like this as well. Of course, over that period of time, relative to the rest of the world, it was very much short and sharp.
And did Dr. Bloomfield recommend for the lockdown to be extended, level 4 to be extended through to midnight Sunday? And why didn't you go with that advice?
We followed his advice. Keep in mind, Dr. Bloomfield often iteratively shares with us advice and then comes onto a cabinet call and based on the data we get at 9 a.m. that morning, then gives us his latest reflections. But I'll let him speak to his own advice.
Yes, certainly. My advice was, and based on consultation advice from my team, was for the whole country through to Friday, and indeed extending Auckland out that longer period.
Can I ask, please, what's happening with the...
Sorry, and then I'll come to you, Jane.
Are you effectively saying that it's quite likely that all regions outside Auckland will move to level 3 if there are no unconnected cases from now until then, or is it more of a case we need more visibility on where those contacts are?
Yes. Look at it, the way that I would describe it, we do need more information. We need more certainty. We don't want to take any risks with Delta. If the world has taught us anything, it is to be cautious with this variant of COVID-19. Having said that, we do believe that that is an appropriate check-in point because we do want to look at whether or not we've seen any of those locations of interest present then as challenges in other parts of the country like the South Island, whether or not we've seen cases there, whether we've seen wastewater results there. So that felt like an appropriate check-in. It also gives us a decent amount of time once everyone's stayed put after we've had that relocation period. Yeah, I'll let Derek finish, yeah?
Can you clarify whether there's been any of today's cases have been from the locations of interest you identified yesterday as concerned, like the Māori troops on Sunday? Can you also clarify, you also mentioned the 2 cases among Auckland University students? Auckland University has been in touch with us to say that they are unaware of that, so maybe you need AUT, can you clarify that as well?
On the first point, yes, most of our emergent cases now are, it is quite clear at first glance that there is a link to existing cases, and a number of the new ones are associated today with the AOG church service 2 Sundays ago. Likewise, I don't have the number off the top of my head. Likewise, even in Wellington, all the newly emergent cases in Wellington are connected with and are close contacts of known cases, and all bar one had been in isolation for the full period of their infectivity. So the picture in Wellington is reassuring at the moment, but obviously we continue to watch closely. On the University of Auckland, there was a little bit of confusion in our initial assessment, and this relates to the student who travelled from Auckland to Wellington, as one of the cases, is a University of Auckland student. My understanding is there is one other University of Auckland student who has tested positive. Now, I'm not sure if it's related to that original one and the same exposure event, but that's the information I have.
It appears to be coming from the ball that you mentioned.
Could be. The student who travelled here to Wellington was in a hall of residence in Auckland, and that hall of residence, about 500 students who have now dispersed around the country, and so that's a very important group that we're following up.
One final, if I may just make an observation before I come to you, Jane. One of the things that we're seeing in the reports from when we're briefed by the Public Health Unit is that they are being very clear that whilst they may not have established a person-to-person link with the cases that have come through in any one tranche when they're reported in the morning, they are very quickly identifying location links. Now, that's actually a bit of a difference in perhaps what we've seen in previous outbreaks. We always were driving for those person-to-person links, but in a Delta environment, simply being in the same place is building that connection to these clusters, and that demonstrates, I guess, really the way that Delta's behaving. Yeah, Jane.
What more can you tell us about the investigation into the walkway at the Crowne Plaza? Are there more than one walkways? And also, do you think you're zeroing in on the potential exposure point?
Dr. Bloomfield, he knows that I'm particularly obsessed with source investigations, which is not a new thing for me. So you will have heard some discussion yesterday around, for the Crowne Plaza, there's been some debate from some people around the exercise area of the Crowne Plaza. The individual in question, as we've already traversed, did not access the exercise area because they did not clear a positive test and so weren't able to. So that then leaves in play the question of the atrium, which is separated from the public, and the public area, as public health keep reminding us, is well ventilated. They have, however, sought to identify from the footage that they have some members of the public, a small number that were in the vicinity of the atrium at the time. They have located the majority of those, and they have been tested. They're just looking from, I recall, 2 more. So nothing further required from the general public on that source investigation at present.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Delta has a head start on us, the Prime Minister's words this afternoon before she announced how New Zealand will play catch-up. The whole of the country will remain in alert level 4 until midnight Friday. Any shift in levels will be assessed on that day. For Auckland, it is a longer haul. To give certainty, the Prime Minister's announced the city will be at alert level 4 until at least next Tuesday at 11:59pm. Cabinet will review that decision on Monday. There are 35 new community cases of COVID today, bringing the total in the Delta cluster to 107. 99 of those cases are in Auckland, 8 are in Wellington. So far, no other cities or towns have returned positives for this highly transmissible strain, including the Coromandel, where an early case travelled. As of 8am this morning, 13,230 individual contacts had been identified, but that number will have risen since, with more locations of interest identified. There's now more than 330 of those, including an elevator, takeaway joints, gyms, 2 running events, hardware stores and countless supermarkets. Now, to help us break all of this down, joining us now is Otago University public health expert, Professor Nick Wilson. Good afternoon, Professor. What do you make of the decision the Prime Minister has announced? Is it the right one?
Yes, I think it's pretty clear that it's the right one. There's still a lot of uncertainty, and so keeping it alert level 4 until at least Friday night for the whole country does seem a very prudent and appropriate measure.
Why? Because we've only seen cases in Auckland and Wellington.
The picture is one that is not too surprising in terms of numbers at this stage, and it actually gives some reassurance that we haven't had large super spreading events in the days before moving into alert level 4. So the situation, I think, is quite reassuring, and it's quite possible that New Zealand will replicate the success of controlling a Delta outbreak as we've actually seen in Queensland and South Australia.
We've been told to expect more cases. When do you think that cases will start to track downward?
Well, unless there's been a super spreading event that we've missed, I would expect to actually start seeing the decline sometime in the next few days. So, I think basically the rapid response and the short period between the MIQ failure and seeing the first case, that has made controlling this Delta outbreak relatively easier than it's been in places like New South Wales and Melbourne.
I want to get to the MIQ failure in a minute, but a lot of people are wondering why we haven't seen any cases in Coromandel when one of the early cases visited that part of the country and went to a number of events with a lot of people and was in a lot of social settings. Can you offer us any explanation for that?
Sure. Well, we know with this pandemic virus that infectiousness varies a lot by person and over time. So some people are very infectious, may even infect 100 people at a particular event, and we saw that actually in things like the Bluff wedding. But there's lots of occasions where individuals infect no other people. So it's this very extreme variability. And so with the Coromandel situation, maybe we've been lucky and the person wasn't particularly infectious when they were in Coromandel.
And without getting too complicated, is that because of the way the virus manifests itself in an individual?
Partly. It's the time since they were infected, the person's immune system and how it responds, even the amount of virus that they breathe in. But then it's also dependent on the setting. So we know that certain places like bars and nightclubs and so on are sort of super spreading settings. A lot of people crowded together, often poor ventilation. So it's that combination of the person and the setting which will determine if there is transmission.
Okay, let's then go to the source case, the earliest case, which they believe is this returnee from Sydney in MIQ at a central city hotel, Crowne Plaza. Does this just reiterate what you've been saying about the location of these isolation facilities right in the middle of a town, right where all the people are wandering around?
Yes, unfortunately, hotels, and especially central city hotels, were never designed to be used for quarantine. So that location is highly problematic, but also the sheer amount of shared space and the lack of appropriate ventilation. You know, we've seen zero MIQ failures in Howard Springs in the facility outside Darwin, a very large facility, and it's simply because all the buildings are single story, they're separated, and there's extremely good ventilation. So there's no surprises there that we keep having problems, and it really is now time to have another serious relook at not using hotels for quarantine.
Should the Crowne Plaza be used again after this incident?
Well, in my view, no central city hotel should be used, except for maybe people from extremely low-risk countries. We really need to start following the example of Victoria and Queensland and building dedicated facilities.
Yeah, well, the government's talked about gearing up, being prepared for Delta, and told us actually a couple of weeks ago to expect that this was inevitable, that we would get an outbreak here. Given the warning they gave us, did they not heed their own warning in continuing to use these facilities?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's very wide agreement amongst epidemiologists and experts in infection control that you need really high quality facilities with good ventilation. And it's just been a matter of convenience that the government has kept using these hotels. And there's a certain sort of rigidity in the thinking around that. We really need, especially with Delta, to be highly flexible in our response and to have state-of-the-art facilities, which would also help with future pandemics as well.
So, Professor, I'm just wondering here then, given everything we know about Delta, I suppose the question I'm asking you, I know they've said this is how we're doing it, but once we became aware of Delta and how it spreads, should that have been enough information for them to say we need to change this immediately?
Yes, there's a range of things that not only improving the quarantine system, but also we should have actually been fast-tracking the vaccination of essential workers. They should have actually all moved up to the top of the queue, because we saw with the Delta outbreak in New South Wales that essential workers who were unvaccinated were spreading the virus. So although the government has announced some fast tracking for essential workers. This should have happened long ago, and it should now be really fast tracked, especially in Auckland and Wellington, because that might help reduce the length of a lockdown and help us move through the alert level 3 and down to alert level 2 much faster if the essential workers are vaccinated.
Professor, that will be for the next levels though, won't it? The horse is already bolted with this, because even if we're told every day the volume of people getting vaccinated is hitting record levels, it will still take a period of time before they're actually, protected by the vaccination that they've got. So it's not going to help us in level 4, is it?
It would depend on how long we're in level 4, because if you started vaccinating more essential workers tomorrow, you'd start to see some benefit within a week or so. But yes, it will mainly benefit those other alert levels. But, it would also give us more confidence about moving a place like Auckland from level 4 to level 3 if we know that process of vaccinating essential workers was well in place and they were really being properly prioritised.
Do the levels need to change at all when you're dealing with Delta?
Well, there's a range of improvements that we suggested actually many months ago to give us more flexibility to avoid lockdowns. But, I do hope the government re-looks at this. But in particular, I think there needs to be more emphasis on the regional approach so that we can rapidly move to have the South Island, for example, to move down alert levels. And that would mean improving the border so that essential workers aren't moving across on the ferry and in planes from the North Island to the South Island, so that we can be sure that there's absolutely no cases in the South Island and it can rapidly move down the alert level system.
So, Professor, in that circumstance, you're essentially saying that we would need to cut the South Island off altogether. So no planes carrying people back and forth, no ferries. If you want to go down an alert level, you're basically an island on your own.
So that's the extreme end of the spectrum. We could allow, for example, vaccinated truck drivers to cross on the ferry, or there could be systems, people drive their truck onto the ferry and then another worker from the South Island drives it off. There could be ways we could have normal movement of freight, but with better infection controls in place.
And do you think it warrants those extreme measures, Delta?
Well, these measures may only be needed for a matter of days to be confident, say that the South Island is COVID-free, and then you get the huge economic benefits of rapidly getting the South Island or various parts of the North Island outside Wellington, Auckland, into a more fully normal situation with normal economic activity and social activity.
I just want to go back to the Crowne Plaza, right, which is now the focus of an investigation as to how Delta got out into the community. And the scenario that is being looked at closely is this walkway inside the hotel where members of the public could use that. They were separated from people isolating by a perspex screen. What is your assessment of that arrangement?
Well, I think it's probably definitely not ideal. I mean, my ideal setting is places like Howard Springs. But one way to think about this is that when you smell cigarette smoke from someone smoking, those are particles of smoke, but virus can move through the air, and so actually you can sometimes smell a smoker in certain still situations many metres away. So I can imagine how virus-laden particles could move around many of these type of flimsy arrangements. And so it's just, again, highlighting this is a very infectious agent, and we've got to really build the arrangements to face this unfortunate reality.
So while I've been talking to you, we've had some feedback coming in about the time and money it would take to build state-of-the-art facilities. Do you have any idea from now until operation? I mean, how soon is it possible to get something like that up and running?
Well, it's possible to get mobile homes that are already built moved to particular areas. But really, in terms of the cost, if we think of the MIQ failure that probably led to the Auckland August outbreak, which cost many hundreds of millions of dollars, you could build some amazing facilities for even a tiny fraction of that cost. And potentially after the pandemic, you could sell off the mobile homes or the other built facilities. So really, there's no doubt in my mind that this is a highly cost-beneficial approach because we just keep having these MIQ failures costing the country hundreds of millions of dollars a week.
The Prime Minister has raised the fact that obviously she gave a 48-hour grace period for people to return to their normal place of residence. And so that's part of the reason why we're having level 4 lockdown for the whole country for longer, because the time it took for those people to get home, basically isolation starts from the date they arrived home, right? Was that a mistake? Because there were several hundred students, for example, at an exposure event in a halls of residence, who all then went home, plus I think the figure was around 8,000 other people left Auckland. Was that a mistake?
From a epidemiological disease control point of view, it was a definite mistake. And we've seen that other places have learnt that you've got to work quickly. I think in Western Australia, they give people 1 hour warning. I mean, sociologically and in terms of kindness and people being in the right bubble, it's all good, but it is going to make it all harder. And, having people stay in a different region for another week or so, I mean, there could have been support for that, and that would have, allowed us to have far more confidence. I mean, when thousands of people are travelling all around the country, it just means that you can't do these regional approaches very well. So I think this approach needs to be seriously reviewed.
So, Professor, would you have taken the pragmatic rather than the kind view and said 1 hour, everybody shut down?
Yes, that would have been the appropriate approach, and it actually is kind if you prevent a lot of disease spreading, and also if you have shorter lockdowns.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Professor Nick Wilson, who's an Otago University public health expert. Well, the whole country will remain in level 4 until the end of the week. Now, that includes the South Island, despite the fact there have been no cases detected yet. Bruce Smith is the Westland Mayor and joins me now. Bruce, what do you reckon of this decision?
Oh, Lisa, it's fair to say I was a bit disappointed.
Why, Bruce?
Well, the entire country has got behind government in the way it's handled the lockdown for the first week. There are no cases in the South Island, and to shut down the entire South Island economy for extra time when there are no cases there, it just seems to be something that's a stretch too far.
Did you see the press conference and the Prime Minister held up a map to show you where some of the close contacts were, and there were lots of highlighted places in the South Island? So is it not better to err on the side of caution, Bruce?
I saw the map, and yes, caution is great, but you've got to balance it with the support of the people, and you've got to balance it with the economy. So, the reality is that, of course, there's people in the South Island who have been at events or have been in close contacts, but there are no cases. I mean, surely there would be a case for dropping South Island back down to, say, level 2, and if in fact cases turned up on Friday or Saturday or Sunday, moving it back again, and without continuing the economic damage. It's a balancing act. At the end of the day, government's going to do what it's going to do. But you've asked my opinion, and I'm very supportive of the first part of it. I'm just a bit nervous about this. It just feels like could be one of those things where it's how long's a piece of string and it could keep going.
So, Bruce, when you say you're a bit nervous, how long do you reckon you can keep people compliant?
You can keep them compliant if they understand exactly what it is that you're doing and exactly what the time frames are. And it's a bit like vaccinations and saying, okay, well, look, we want to get 80% of the population vaccinated, and that's the target, and measure it every day. People will go along with that because they'll know there's a plan. They know that there's a direction. They know there's an end. But if it goes round and where there's no definite time frames and no definite set of circumstances that will cause, say, level 2 or level 3, at that point we'll start to lose them.
Bruce, do you reckon some people in your part of the world are getting a bit antsy about this?
They'll be disappointed today. They'll be disappointed. I'm not sure that they're antsy yet. If we get to Friday and the message is, well, let's wait another week, I could see that being a bit of a problem.
So tell me, how many people, in your experience, your observations, how many people scan down there or write down where they've been?
Well, most people I know do.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and it just becomes part of you walk into the cafe, you pull your camera out, and you scan it. Most people do. I don't know whether the figures back that statement up or not, but that's my observation. But that may also be in my age group.
Yeah, so have you had a chance to speak to businesses about this rule, mandatory scanning, and the fact that it is the place of the gathering that's going to have to be responsible for making sure people scan?
I've talked to a few, and most are very relaxed about it.
And how are vaccinations going down there? Are people enthusiastically going out to get immunised?
Look, we had a session today, and my understanding is we're heading up around the 50% mark, but there's some mass vaccination events about to occur. And so I think the population is generally well and truly in behind heading for a target of, say, 80%.
Bruce, just before I started talking to you, I had Professor Nick Wilson on. He's a professor of public health, right? He has raised this scenario where he says maybe you could cut the South Island off, in essence, stop people travelling by ferry in a situation where you've got the North Island in level 4. Don't let people back and forward in the ferry and on planes unless they're double vaccinated, essential workers, freight going across to the South Island. Is that something you could get behind?
Absolutely. That sounds like a very common sense approach. And of course, if it was the other way around and there was an outbreak in the South Island, reverse it as well. Shutting down the whole of New Zealand is, at some stage, we have to start thinking about our business people and employment, because if you don't have jobs, you certainly won't have a community.
How much are people hurting there from an economic point of view?
In some areas, it's significant. And on the coast here, in Fox and Ferns, the lack of international tourists has been major. Their cash flows are down to probably 20% of what they were pre-COVID.
So you basically got no economy, Bruce.
Well, our economies in our three main towns, in Westport, Greymouth and Hokitika, are actually they're ticking along all right. Domestic tourism, with the support of people around the country, has been fantastic. Probably the greatest numbers that I've ever seen. And so we're not in dire straits, but we have to keep the focus on a balanced economy, and health comes into that. Health's of course really important, but you can't just look at you've got to look at a balanced economy and a balanced community.
Good to talk to you, Bruce. That's Bruce Smith, who is the Westland Mayor. Secondary school students facing high-stakes assessments will be in lockdown until at least Friday night, until the end of the month for Aucklanders. The Ministry of Education says schools already have flexibility in how they deliver NCEA. It says any changes to NCEA for all or part of New Zealand will be considered if necessary, depending on the country's alert level settings. Mika Taitoa is the Auckland Grammar Head of Student Services and joins me now. Kia ora, Mika. What are students saying to you?
Yeah, I think, thank you for the opportunity. I think what students are saying is that, again, it seems messy. They want certainty in a position now that everything's up in the air for them going forward.
So what kind of certainty do they need?
Well, I think we need to put Ministry of Education in the conversation in regards to, we've got, if we use our school leavers as an example for students in their last year, they've got a lot at stake. So I think they deserve to be given early indications of what NCA might look like going forward.
So how early do you need those? When should the students be told?
Well, I think as early as last week, to be honest. Going forward, I know many schools have scenario planned along the way. We've learnt from last year. Last year was the first time, and I know for our leadership team and like most around the country, they've gone through a scenario plan. So I think the Ministry of Education should have already prepared for this and had options ready to go once again if we went into a lockdown.
The Ministry says NCEA is flexible, right? And that's its strength. That's their words. And that schools can adapt how they deliver NCEA to reflect their environment. Is there enough flexibility? How far can you adapt and reflect your environment with the power that you've got, or you need someone else to make those decisions?
Well, look, ultimately it comes from them. We're guided by them. Obviously, we're all in a level 4 lockdown. But I guess if you look at the loss of classroom teaching, we look at some students perhaps just don't learn as useful, as helpful as they would online, as they would have been in class. So I think, we need a good, clear indication. And yes, it is flexible, but again, we still haven't heard what is the message, what is the plan going forward.
So do you want students to get extra credits or have longer timeframes to deliver work or longer lead-ins to exams? What are the things that you would like to see happen?
I think at the moment, I mean, it's complex, that's for sure, and I don't think our students mind which path or paths we're going down. I think for students and for parents especially, what is the plan necessarily right now, and we need a clear direction on that for starters, so we can move forward in terms of planning. So
I'm wondering, because we've been doing this for about 18 months or so. Can't keep up with how many months actually, Mika. But are students telling you different things about how and what they see their future is in terms of the professions they want to go into and in jobs? Has pandemic changed their thinking at all?
I think in terms of preparation, it's helped them plan a little bit. I guess in that sphere of preparedness. So, I don't think from a careers point of view, I don't think there's been a big sway from one career profession to another. But I think they've definitely put COVID in the mix of their planning. I think also you're looking at in terms of what they're needing to get into university entrance. That's a big question mark for a lot of year leavers, and I think looking at uncertainty and quite messy, they just need a clear direction.
So, Mika, how do teachers engage kids that are basically on the other side of a computer, sat at home?
Yeah, good question. I think as good as we can, as good as we can, I think is probably more the answer. Again, we have to be mindful that on the other side of the computer, the loss of student engagement in terms of learning online just isn't probably the best form for a lot of students across the country. So we have to be mindful of that. And if we prioritise learners, I think that's probably the most important thing to look at, as well as other messes, is that some students would just lose the engagement in learning because it's online. So as a teacher myself and a lot of my colleagues around the country, they can do what they can do, but again, it's a difficult time. So a clear direction going forward from the Ministry of Education would be the best thing for everybody.
So, Mika, for some kids then, is it basically that their education, comes to a standstill during this time for some children?
I think it's about us as as educators, especially with the ministry, giving some certainty. I think a lot of students have question marks, and it's about giving them some certainty around what the next couple of months around examinations going forward. What does that look like? Because until we hear from the ministry, then there might be some adjustments from the other end, as looking at tertiary providers in terms of what they can do as well. So.
How stressful is it for students at this time then, with the uncertainty that you're talking about?
Yeah, look, I haven't. I know it is very stressful. I think it's very uncertain for them. But I think I remember reading last year there was about 98% of students across the country who were very, very stressed, very thinking about what their future years were going to look like. There's also a lot of evidence around the elevated anxiety within students, not knowing. So, it definitely is there within the student cohorts.
Ngā mihi Mika Taitoa, the Auckland Grammar Head of Student Services there. When news of the lockdown broke, people raced out and got broccoli. The trouble is, it's getting harder for vegetable growers to handle the demands of keeping supermarkets stocked. Sally Murphy reports.
A positive case of COVID at Pukekohe High School is causing problems for vegetable growers in South Auckland. Key workers are having to stay home to isolate. Jerry Prendergast from the pan-sector group United Fresh says a huge effort is going into keeping supermarkets well stocked during Alert Level 4, but it's getting harder.
The latest situation in Pukekohe, where the high school has been taken out in Pukekohe, and they've got a lot of families from that high school that, of course, are working in Pukekohe, which now have to self-isolate. And I'm getting some feedback from people this morning early that that's going to be really challenging for some of those growers out that way who are used to having, a full team on.
Growers working under Level 4 are following the government's hygiene and social distancing guidelines, but Jerry Prendergast says this has slowed down the harvesting of ground crops.
I've had reports where you've got growers that are needing to sort of almost half their efficiency program, basically because if their harvesting teams were able to run an efficient program before, where they could be close together, cutting, going down a row, you're not able to do that. So there's some real challenges for them.
Despite all that, fruit and vegetables are flowing into supermarkets and the supply chain is holding up. But some supermarkets are under pressure to find enough workers to keep the shelves stocked, says Jerry Prendergast.
A lot of those stores are really struggling to fill the shelves. It's not so much that the stock's not there, it's not so much that it's not getting through the supply chain. The challenge is actually filling the shelves. And if we see a lot of pressure go back on, if you think about the amount of consuming of food that's going on at home. The good news is they're actually consuming lots of fresh fruit and vegetables because they're eating at home, they're cooking at home. The biggest challenge is getting those shelves full. So I ask consumers just to be a little patient when they're in those supermarkets.
Kylie Faulkner from the Pukekohe Vegetable Growers Association agrees it's a challenging time. She says it's hard to know exactly how many staff from around the region are affected by having to isolate. Kylie Faulkner says there's a lot of apprehension in the community and the association is trying to reassure staff and have strict protocols in place for safety.
What we've had to do is we've really had to, all of the businesses have had to look about how they do work bubbles and really make those bubbles tighter. So what that does is it restricts the harvest capability, because if you have staff that don't come to work, or things are a lot slower because you've got smaller bubbles of people and working in lots of different areas. So to coordinate that can sometimes be quite difficult.
Pukekohe High School says its thoughts are with the individual staff member who has tested positive for COVID-19 and was at school on Monday, August 16. It's pointing its school community to the testing centres, which have been set up for staff and students at the Pukekohe A&P Showgrounds and the Seddon Medical Centre.
The goal of returning to normal is slipping through the fingers of New South Wales as case numbers climbed by more than 800 again today. But Premier Gladys Berejiklian says some freedoms will be restored when the state hits its target of 10 million jabs. As the ABC's Alexia Atwood reports, health experts and other premiers aren't so convinced by her optimism.
818 new cases, with many in the community while infectious. Life in New South Wales without COVID seems a distant memory.
I don't want us to focus so much on the case numbers going up and down. Absolutely want to see the case numbers go down, no doubt about that, and we're working so hard together to make that possible. But the number we really need to focus on is the vaccination rate.
Vaccinations are the centre of Gladys Berejiklian's message, and her goal of 6 million jabs by the end of August might come early, by the end of this week.
In relation to the 6 million jabs and schools going back, I said that we'd have more to say about that towards the end of this week, and we will. We'll be able to communicate what additional freedom people might have once they get to full vaccination during September.
And that's the State Premier Gladys Berejiklian there. It is almost time for the news at news at 5 rather. We'll be back after that with all the details of the extended Level 4 lockdown.
Ahi Mari e RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. All of New Zealand will remain at alert level 4 for another 4 days until 11:59pm this Friday. The Auckland region, however, will remain in lockdown until 11:59pm next Tuesday, meaning it will be at level 4 for at least 14 days. The Delta outbreak grew to 107 cases today, with 33 community cases reported in Auckland and 2 in Wellington. The number of contacts has also ballooned, with more than 13,000 now identified. That number is expected to climb further throughout the day. Jacinda Ardern says case numbers will continue to rise, and the safest option is to hold the course for longer.
Delta has changed the rules of the game, but we've changed our approach too. We've hardened our alert levels, widened our contact tracing, required more mask wearing, and we are testing more people. It is absolutely possible to get on top of this. We just need to keep it up and ensure that we're not in restrictions any longer than we need to be.
Cabinet ministers will review Auckland's lockdown in 1 week and alert level settings for the rest of the country on Friday. The Prime Minister has suspended Parliament for at least 1 week. Under Parliament's rules, the Prime Minister can postpone Parliament sitting by up to a month during an epidemic on the advice of the Director-General of Health. Jacinda Ardern says all ministers have been asked to make themselves available to appear before existing select committees this week, which will meet virtually. The police have issued hundreds of fines to people breaking lockdown rules. Officers began issuing infringement notices on Thursday. 365 fines have been issued, with almost 90% for people failing to remain at their current address. 15 have been issued for failing to wear a face covering. The Police Commissioner, Andrew Costa, says the majority of people are following the rules. Families at 2 of the Auckland schools where students have tested positive for COVID-19 are reporting hardship. Macaulay High School in Otahuhu and De La Salle College in Mangere have students who tested positive last week. The chair of De La Salle College, Falaniko Tomanio, says many families need food parcels to get by.
You know, we have a lot of families who've been hard hit by this. Families who were essential workers who now have to self-isolate for 14 days. Our families are amongst the poorest, and we are most likely the most affected of all peoples.
Dr. Falaniko Tomanio says the schools have been putting families in touch with organisations to deliver food packs to their homes. Teacher Union, the Educational Institute, says its members are feeling better prepared for teaching from home than they were last year. The NZEI says 2,000 members responded to a survey, and most said they were confident about teaching their pupils remotely. They told the union their schools had planned for the possibility of another lockdown, and teachers and children knew what to expect. The first group of New Zealand citizens and their families evacuated from Taliban-controlled Afghanistan will arrive in the country today. About 80 Defence Force troops travelled to the Middle East last week to assist with evacuation efforts. It's hoped more than 50 New Zealand citizens and at least 200 Afghani who helped New Zealand's efforts there will be brought back. A group of investors in the failed Ross Asset Management Company and the ANZ Bank have reached a settlement. The group claimed that ANZ, as the company's bank, knew or should have known that Wellington financial advisor David Ross was operating a Ponzi scheme. Here's business editor Giles Beckford.
The investors group was claiming $80 million from ANZ, which tried unsuccessfully to stop the Financial Markets Authority from passing on information to the group and then failed to have the claims struck out. Both sides say they were misled by Ross, but all details of the settlement are confidential. The company collapsed in 2012, owing about 700 investors $115 million. Some investors who got out early with good profits were ordered to repay their gains to the liquidators. Ross served 6 years of a 10 years and 10 months sentence for the fraud.
It's 4 minutes past 5. Moving now into sport, the former captain of the national men's football side, Ryan Nelson, says he never played for the All Whites, but rather New Zealand. Nelson is pleased New Zealand football is looking at doing away with the term All Whites amid a review of cultural inclusivity. Nelson led the side at the 2010 World Cup, where they went unbeaten, but says while generations have grown up knowing the name, it was never a key motivator for him.
I didn't play for the name the All Whites. I played for New Zealand. I played for the country. That's all I cared about, was representing 5 million New Zealanders and the New Zealand football community. What name is associated with that is, so be it. I mean, if it was called any other name, it wouldn't have changed my way of thinking.
This season's wooden spooners, the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic, have further strengthened their lineup for next year's ANZ Premiership signing Silver Ferns, Bailey Mares and Claire Kirsten. The pair joined Silver Ferns captain Amelia Ann Ignacio, who announced last week she was joining the Hamilton-based franchise. 70-test veteran Mez has been at the title-winning Mystics for the past 10 years, while mid-quarter Kirsten captained the Pulse this year. The signing of shooters Ignacio and Mez comes with Australian international Caitlin Bassett not returning to the Magic in 2022. And finally, 4 Pacific Island nations have been forced to withdraw from the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics because of travel restrictions due to COVID-19. Samoa, Kiribati, Tonga and Vanuatu have pulled out of the Games, which start tomorrow. And that's the news.
The tracing system hits capacity.
Every single individual who's on the list needs to be contacted and their situation explored and investigated.
Trust issues with the Tracer app.
Māori are not going to take this up. People have called it vaccine hesitancy. It's not vaccine hesitancy. It's actually just a low trust.
And Trans-Tasman rugby turns ugly.
48 hours leading up to Friday lunchtime, everyone knew the scenario. The press release New Zealand put out was shared with Rugby Australia.
Up to the minute news, morning report, weekdays from 6 till 9 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty, cloudy periods and the odd shower, but mainly fine about Auckland City. For the remainder of the North Island, generally fine with some cloudy areas, the odd shower about Taranaki, Kapiti and Wellington, and a chance of a shower for Waikato and the Central High Country tomorrow afternoon. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with periods of rain, easing to showers in the north this evening. Heavy falls about the ranges south of Otira tomorrow. For Nelson, mostly cloudy with scattered showers today, isolated showers about the ranges tomorrow and fine breaks elsewhere. For Marlborough, occasional showers about the Sounds and inland ranges, fine elsewhere. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine with variable high cloud, but scattered rain about the main divide. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. The time is now 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā, Sarah. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. All of New Zealand will remain at alert level 4 for another 4 days until 11:59pm this Friday. The Auckland region, however, will remain in lockdown until 11:59pm next Tuesday, August 31st. The Delta outbreak has grown to 107 cases today, with 33 new infections reported in Auckland and 2 more in Wellington. The number of contacts has also ballooned, with more than 13,000 now identified. That number is expected to climb further throughout the day. Jacinda Ardern says they are located all across the country and the safest option is to hold the course for longer.
We are still very much in the thick of this outbreak, but I can also tell you that Cabinet and the health team remain confident. Delta has changed the rules of the game, but we've changed our approach too. We've hardened our alert levels, widened our contact tracing, required more mask wearing, and we are testing more people. It is absolutely possible to get on top of this. We just need to keep it up and ensure that we're not in restrictions any longer than we need to be.
Cabinet ministers will review Auckland's lockdown next Monday and the country's alert level settings on Friday. Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand has not yet reached the peak of this outbreak or possibly even the edges of it. She says more information is needed before restrictions can ease in parts of the country.
We don't want to take any risks with Delta. If the world has taught us anything, it is to be cautious with this variant of COVID-19. Having said that, we do believe that that is an appropriate check-in point because we do want to look at whether or not we've seen any of those locations of interest present then as challenges in other parts of the country like the South Island, whether or not we've seen cases there, whether we've seen wastewater results there.
Jacinda Ardern has also suspended Parliament for at least 1 week. Under Parliament's rules, the Prime Minister can postpone Parliament sitting by up to a month during an epidemic on the advice of the Director-General of Health. She says bringing MPs from across the country poses a risk.
For this week, we've asked all ministers to make themselves available to appear before Parliament's select committees, which of course have a range of opposition MPs and spokespeople on them, as these committees will continue to meet virtually. That will allow us to balance safety and scrutiny.
99 of the 107 cases in this Delta cluster are in Auckland, just 8 are in the capital. And so far, no other cities or towns have returned positives for this highly transmissible strain. And the Crowne Plaza in Auckland CBD is at the centre of an investigation into how Delta got into the community after genome sequencing linked the outbreak to a Sydney returnee who was isolating there. It also turns out 6 members of the public were using a thoroughfare through the hotel that's only separated from isolating guests by a Perspex divider. At the time, the positive case was in the lobby. Joining me now is Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. Phil, given the information that we've heard from the Prime Minister, Auckland lockdown until at least next Tuesday, would you have done the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely, Lisa. Look, I think the Prime Minister mentioned that the transmission rate was about 6. That's for each person infected. They'll pass it on to 6 others. And that needs to come down to less than 1 to know that you're on top of the spread of the virus. 13,000 contacts, probably 14,000 by now, over 300 places of interest. If you're going to beat this COVID outbreak, you've got to move really effectively and decisively, and nobody that I've talked to believes that we could have lifted from level 4 in Auckland at the present time.
So how much more difficult does this make life for you at the council?
Well, it makes life difficult for a whole lot of people across the city and really right across the country because we're all under level 4 at the present time. I guess the people I'm thinking of are those that have no income over the period of time that they can't work. That's a real worry. I'm thinking about those people that are living alone, those people that are separated from their families. All of that's tough, but equally, all of us know that if we want to get back to level 1, the best way, the quickest way of doing that is all of us following the rules, acting collectively, making sure that what we do keeps ourselves, our family and our community safe.
Really appreciate that sentiment, but the council, from the point of view of council revenue, when you go into lockdown, you lose a ton of money, don't you?
Yeah, it won't be quite as dramatic as last time because we've already lost the money that was coming, for example, from the port or from the airport. But we, obviously public transport is the one that's most effective, probably $5 million a week being lost there through lack of, I should say, transport fares and parking fees. If you look at the buses at the moment, they have to run because there are essential workers and people going to essential services that need to get around, but they're practically empty. Regional fuel tax, look out the window at the moment, there's hardly a car to be seen. Motorways are a dream to drive on for those people that are essential workers. All the facilities that we would normally have out for hire, events, events and so on, they're closed down. But it's also fair to say that we predicted that this was a real possibility. When we put together our emergency budget and our recovery budget, we budgeted conservatively to take into account that we might go into a lockdown again. So we're confident, provided this lockdown, can be handled within the space of approximately a month, that we'll get through this because we've planned for it.
Okay, so if it drags on longer than a month, that's when you start to get into the danger zone, is it?
Well,
financially.
The longer it drags on, the harder it is for everybody, for those businesses, those individuals that have lost their income, and for, council along with businesses generally that just aren't getting the revenue but are still meeting the costs. And, we're not eligible for the government's wage subsidy scheme, and that's fair enough. Hopefully most of the private sector will be and able to keep their staff on, but we're meeting the staff costs. Those staff that can are working from home. We've volunteered our staff to help with COVID tracing. Our cafeteria staff are again preparing meals for those that are homeless.
Phil, are any of them working as tracers? Because I saw, obviously, the call's gone out for extra resources and people. So are any of your staff now actively working as contact tracers?
We've made that offer to the District Health Boards and to the Ministry of Health. We've said that our people are there and ready to go. Auckland Transport have also made their contact centre people available to help if it's needed. We'll again probably get our librarians out to be making phone calls to the people that are living alone and isolated, particularly the elderly, to make sure that they're okay. So, as many people as we can mobilise to help out with the general effort to deal with COVID, we'll certainly do that.
So from Friday at midnight, Auckland, the region, could be adrift from the rest of the country. Like we might be in level 4 while they might be somewhere else. Have you had discussions about where the border is? And what kind of challenges is this going to present?
Well, the challenges that we faced last time, and
it didn't always go well, did it?
It didn't go well. I had to ring the police myself and say, look, you've got your people staffed on what you think is the border, but you're cutting off part of Auckland from the rest of Auckland. But I think they will have learnt the lessons of that. It's always a bit difficult on the first day that you put those border restrictions in.
But have you had that conversation, Phil? And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm sure there'll be people down south and up north and who've got their ear to the radio right at this very second.
Yeah.
So have you got an established perimeter now so that when this happens, potentially, everybody knows exactly where the border is going?
Yeah. We've had those discussions with the police. They are familiar with where the regional borders lie, and they are familiar with a system that will let
So
people
south,
through.
where will it be, Phil?
The south will be on the border, which is just south of the Bombay Hills. In the north, it'll be just north of Wellsford. So people know where those boundaries are. We don't know yet, of course, whether the Coromandel will be included at the same level as us in the upper part of the Waikato. They've been incredibly lucky. They had an infected person there, but they've had no positive cases showing up. Look, I'm hoping that for the rest of the country, outside of Wellington that's already infected, that people will dodge the bullet and that they can go back to normal. We'll take the misery on our own, but we'll do the right thing, and just encouraging to all Aucklanders, don't hop in the car and drive to the holiday batch. That's a sure way that you put other people at risk. Be responsible, act according to the rules, do what's necessary. That's the way that our city and our country will get through this.
So the centre of this outbreak seems to have come from the Crowne Plaza, right? An MIQ facility that is right smack dang right in the middle of your town, your city, just actually down the road from your offices, right?
I'm 50 metres from it now.
Should it be there? Should it be there at all, MIQ?
Yeah, well, look, by and large, the MIQ has worked, but there have been flaws in a number of the systems, and they've been remedied. We all remember the Pullman Hotel, for example. I know the walkway that they're talking about. There is a perspex sheet between
it beggars belief, doesn't it, Phil?
That are quarantined. But obviously, and they're still checking this out, if it's not working, then they've got to make sure that it does work. I mean, ideally, we'd love to have the COVID facility facilities outside of Auckland. That's not realistic in the time frame that it would take to set up an alternative.
Have you had that conversation with government, suggesting they get out of the centre of town?
We've asked questions about that, and the Prime Minister and the Minister in charge of the quarantine facilities have said that they're prepared to look at that. They have not yet felt that they've been in the position to do it, and we know that we're talking about facilities that could contain several thousand people. We're talking about the need for them to be close enough to the staff, the people that do the cleaning, the cooking, the security work, the health work, to be able to get to. So it's not an easy thing to do, but that's one option that we'd like them to continue to look at, because we just don't know how long this thing is going to go on, and there will come a point in time where we would expect moves to be made to look at those alternatives.
Vaccination. Do you know how much capacity there is at the inner city vaccination sites? Because we're being told they're taking walk-ups.
Yeah, well, we've raised that matter with the government too, to make sure that you've got the drive-in vaccination centres, but a lot of people in the centre of town actually don't have cars, don't want to use public transport at the moment, and to have a walk-in vaccination site, I think would be pretty helpful. Ironically, I got my 2 doses of the vaccination at the Crowne Plaza Hotel, where the site was open and presumably is still open, but I haven't checked that out.
Right, so have you heard back from them about that, an increase in capacity for walk-ups?
Yeah, look, we've made the point that we believe that there needs to be that increased capacity for walk-ups, both for testing actually and for vaccinations.
Was it a mistake not vaccinating all of Auckland first? Given that most of these cases are in Auckland and all the other outbreaks have been the same?
I obviously pushed for that, as you'll recall at the time. We are the gateway city. We are the city that's most likely to go into lockdown. This latest outbreak just proves that point. And we've also raised the question as to whether or not we can lift the level of vaccinations in the city, which is most likely to be affected and where people most need the protection. So I continue to make that case.
Thanks, Phil. That is Phil Goff, the Mayor of Auckland. It is 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e haere ake nei. Well, next we're going to go to Parliament, but later in the programme we'll hear how some of our essential services are coping with a huge number of their staff in isolation too. Well, heading to Parliament now, and our political editor, Jane Patterson. Jane, what's Cabinet been weighing up here?
Well, I think the most difficult thing today, Lisa, was that split between Auckland and the rest of the country. Wellington, of course, has a number of cases, and the Prime Minister showed up that heat map today that shows that there are about 100 close contacts still in the South Island. No positive cases down there, of course. So they're looking at the whole gamut. They're looking at those testing numbers. They're looking at whether they can all be linked to the original cluster, and using things like wastewater to really get that nationwide picture. So I think an interesting approach being taken by the government that we didn't see last year, and that's a much more incremental approach. So much shorter timeframes are being laid out at the moment. And look, that's probably working for now, but I wonder if we get into it next week and lockdowns are just increased by 3 days, by 5 days, if there is a broader need for that lockdown, maybe they will have to look at signalling longer times, because we're only 6 days into it. People are accepting it, but I think there might need to be a little bit more certainty if we are facing a much lengthier lockdown in Auckland in particular.
Jane, do we know how closely the decision that the government has made marries up with the advice given to them by the Director General of Health?
Yes, Ashley Bloomfield was asked that today, and he said that that was the advice that he had given in terms of those timeframes and the advice that had been accepted. Now, you know, there had been a bit of talk about him giving advice about extending it, and the Cabinet decided not to, but Jacinda Ardern said that Dr Bloomfield is brought into the Cabinet call, and when they have a look at all the data, then the decision is made based on Dr Bloomfield's advice, and this is what he suggested or recommended.
What about whether everyone in Cabinet was in agreement? Because obviously there is, the South Island has a slightly different view to the situation than perhaps the North Island, and those MPs would be hearing some of that feedback.
Look, no doubt there was vigorous discussion in Cabinet, as there always will be. The implications are massive, but we have what's called collective Cabinet responsibility. So once the decision is made, all of the ministers around that table are then bound to back that decision and back it publicly. So it's not very often, does happen sometimes, that we hear about disagreements in Cabinet. Normally it's all thrashed out around the Cabinet table, a decision's made, and then they leave it at the door.
What we are hearing about, though, Jane, is some, rumblings over the fact that the Prime Minister has decided to suspend Parliament. Tell us about that.
So it's going to be the House that's suspended. So basically the main operation of kind of the chamber, I suppose. Parliament is still going to work in a very restricted way online, and that is going to be through select committees. So if you remember last lockdown, there was last year, the big level 4 lockdown, there was an extended period. So the Epidemic Response Committee was set up. Simon Bridges drove down from Tauranga and chaired it as the National Party leader. The government has opted not to do that this time. They're going to leave it to the various select committees around Parliament to have ministers before them answering questions, and of course opposition MPs will be on those committees, but the different thing is that it is a majority government this time. A lot of those select committees are stacked with Labour MPs, so it's going to be very interesting to see how they operate and to make sure that they are giving the due scrutiny and letting the opposition really question ministers and not try to block attempts or anything like that. So the opposition, though, the National Party leader and ACT leader, Judith Collins in particular, is not happy that Parliament's suspended, and she's not happy that even the Select Committee process is not going to give her the opportunity to question the Prime Minister directly. Jacinda Ardern says that they've opted on the side of safety. If you ramp up Parliament to the point where all of the MPs and all of the staff are coming back, it actually creates a risk they did not see as necessary. The other thing is Wellington at this point will be in lockdown till Friday, so that's one sitting week out. Last week when we went into lockdown, it was in recess, so this week is affected. There'll be select committees working, and also Jacinda Ardern did say that they expect the opposition MPs to get the bulk of the questions. If it extends into next week, they'll have to start looking about what to do again to make sure there is ongoing political scrutiny and the ability of the opposition MPs to question and really dig into some of these areas of concern that at the moment they're able to express through the media but not put directly to the government.
Thanks, Jane. That is Jane Patterson, our political editor, live from Parliament. Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei nā kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei on the level 4 lockdown extension, particularly in the South Island. What do you make of that? Keeping the whole country at level 4 until Friday, at least. It's going to be reassessed on that day. Auckland is until the following Tuesday. And I'd love to hear thoughts on MIQ facilities, managed isolation facilities in Auckland CBD. Crowne Plaza under investigation, right in the middle of the city. Busy foot traffic area. Is that where they should be? Pātoi mai, you can text me on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email. The address is checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. 7 Auckland countdown supermarkets have been forced to close, mostly due to staff shortages. That's because 1,000 company employees in Auckland and Wellington are isolating because their store is a location of interest or they have family connected to a location of interest. Some employees are also facing childcare issues or are vulnerable to COVID-19. So with their local shut, many Aucklanders have been forced to find alternative ways to feed the family. Here's our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe.
We're outside Countdown Manurewa. This is one of more than a dozen countdowns across Wellington and Auckland that's been forced to close its doors after becoming a location of interest. 300 countdown staff are now isolating. As for customers, well, some of them are still showing up here. They're understanding, but now have to find somewhere else to get their food. By this afternoon, the number of countdown staff isolating had jumped to over 1,000. These shoppers in Manurewa forced to find somewhere else to get their supplies.
I get that, like, all the food has run out and that, either restocking or the lady told us that someone came last week, either tested positive or something. But my reaction to it, I'm not that Māori. Still like dairies may be open. Buy food from there.
Well, I was just here to simply get milk and bread, butter. So it's not really urgent, to say the least, but I guess it does impact on life a little bit. I haven't heard of anything about the supermarket being shut, so I suppose I'll just have to Google it up and see where I can go.
Just my weekly shop. I haven't been here for 10 days, so I'm pretty much out of everything. It's not difficult, it's just that, you know, like any restriction's a restriction, but yeah, no, I agree with the government in the process, so I'm more than happy to go along with it.
But today got the email confirmation saying packed and ready to collect. Email came through at 11:15. Here I am at 11:30 and it's closed with yellow and black tape across the door.
So while the deep cleaners were called in to count down Manurewa, we took a trip to another South Auckland site. Unfortunately, things aren't much rosier at Countdown Takanini.
We're now outside Countdown Takanini. As you can see behind me, people are still showing up, a lot of them confused about why the supermarket is closed. Countdown management have told us that 7 stores are closed in Auckland at the moment, mainly because of staff shortages.
Meanwhile, Countdown says meat shortages reported at its supermarkets over the weekend were due to a technical ordering issue. So we headed to a supermarket that was open in South Auckland, Countdown Manukau, on Great South Road. After a short wait in line, I headed inside. Things here certainly appear to be on the improve.
Well, after visiting 2 South Auckland supermarkets this morning that were completely closed after being locations of interest, we've come here to Countdown in Manukau. Now, staff shortages here appear to be, well, not an issue. As for food production, well, there's plenty of meat, there's plenty of fresh veggies, maybe a little bit of a shortage of bread, and obviously that shortage of toilet paper again, though still starting to come back as well. All in all, if people shop normally, it's clear there'll be plenty for everyone.
The solid stock levels certainly lifting customers' spirits, despite the grim reality of level 4 lockdown.
Really good, actually. The staff were great. So if I couldn't find anything, they helped out. So yeah.
I was shopping for my kids' nappies and... But yeah, I've got all I wanted. Everything is there for everybody. There's no need to rush. Just need to get your shopping and go home and stay safe.
Along with the temporary closures of its Manurewa and Takanini stores, which were identified as places of interest, today Countdown has also shut its Birkenhead, Albert Street, Hauraki Corner, Mangere Mall and Halsey Street sites because of staffing numbers. Getting a lot of feedback on the situation. Let's get to some of it, particularly around MIQ being located in the heart of Auckland, a number of these hotels. This listener says, as regards buildings dedicated to MIQ, that would take so long to build dedicated MIQ. Between everyone jumping up and down, wanting places, and everyone knows that next year sometime, when we're 80% vaccinated, a lot of people with money are going to be demanding we switch to suppression and open the borders. Another person says, Professor Nick Wilson speaks total sense. Why can't we use cruise ships as isolation units? Not like they're busy these days. Another person says, what about Waiuru Army Barracks? Loads of space and isolated. That's from Dave in Wellington. Another listener, though, reckons it takes too much money and too much time to build state-of-the-art isolation facilities. Hard enough to build enough houses normally. It's just simply not realistic or desirable, they say. This person says, as someone who normally passes from the Crowne Plaza car park through the atrium and the flimsy plastic walkway and into the Huawei building and return every weekday, I can safely say that my colleagues and I are very eager for this information to be released. This is around how that infection may have escaped the Crowne Plaza. And this person says, I cannot help but think it would be easier to find the unidentified people from the atrium/Crowne Plaza walkway if they would tell us exactly when patient zero was transferred in and out of the Crowne Plaza. Do keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. e te iwi e haere ake nei I a checkpoint. If you're just joining us, the country will remain in alert level 4 until 11:59 on Friday night, and Auckland will stay in a level 4 until at least next Tuesday, August 31st at 11:59. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins joins us live after 6 tonight, as does COVID-19 modeller Rodney Jones. But coming up, South Island event organisers scramble to organise mandatory scanning and to figure out what events might still be able to go ahead. Homai o whakaro. Don't forget, we love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Ane a Sarah mina pita pita kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. All of New Zealand will remain at alert level 4 for another 4 days until a minute before midnight this Friday. The Auckland region, however, will remain in lockdown until a minute before midnight next Tuesday, meaning it will be at level 4 for at least 14 days. The extended lockdowns were announced by the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern late this afternoon. The Delta outbreak grew to 107 cases today, with 33 community cases reported in Auckland and 2 in Wellington. The number of contacts has also ballooned, with more than 13,000 now identified, and that number is expected to climb further throughout the day. Jacinda Ardern says case numbers will continue to rise, and the safest option is to hold the course for longer. Roughly 3% of the New Zealand population has now been tested in the latest outbreak. Health officials have processed more than 154,000 COVID tests in the past 6 days, a record number. Parliament has been suspended for at least 1 week. Under Parliament's rules, the Prime Minister can postpone Parliament sitting by up to a month during an epidemic on the advice of the Director-General of Health. Select committees will continue virtually. Barriers have gone up at the entrances to many popular parks and beaches in New Plymouth as authorities try to discourage people driving across town to exercise during lockdown. The first group of New Zealand citizens, their families and other visa holders evacuated from Afghanistan were due to arrive in New Zealand this afternoon. About 80 Defence Force troops travelled to the Middle East last week to assist with evacuation efforts. And finally, a group of investors in the failed Ross Asset Management Group have reached a settlement with ANZ Bank. The group claimed ANZ, as the company's bank, knew or should have known that Wellington financial advisor David Ross was operating a Ponzi scheme. Details of the settlement are confidential. Those are your headlines. A further news and sport update at 6.
No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei, ko taku hoa and nai ko Nona Peltier, who joins us to talk business. Nona, let's start with Z Energy, right? It's received this non-binding takeover proposal from Ampol. I mean, what or who is Ampol and what's the offer?
Well, Ampol is a big Australian-based fuel company, and the offer is a $2 billion takeover offer for Z. Now, that values the company's share price at $3.78 each. Now, some people are saying that's a fairly opportunistic price, given that Z was, around $8.50 just 5 years ago. But, the fuel industry has fallen through some hard times, and certainly there's some challenges ahead. So perhaps the deal isn't particularly on the low side. It will take time, though, before Ampol is able to say whether or not they're happy with that offer they made. They've been given 4 weeks by Z to do some due diligence, and that means going through Z's books and seeing whether or not the offer stacks up one way or another.
And the Financial Markets Authority, Nona, has issued a formal warning to the share trading platform Sharesies for failing to comply with anti-money laundering rules. What is that all about?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because Sharesies, basically, it's a small retail type of app. So, it can be anybody, mom and pop or whoever, would be able to go onto Sharesies and make small trades. Like, instead of buying a whole share of an expensive company, you can buy just a piece of it. But it turns out they've got 8,000 customers with balances more than $1,000. And for those customers, they should have been subject to greater due diligence by Sharesies. And that means that they have to verify that there's no money laundering going on through these particular accounts. Now, the FMA has said that there's no suggestion that Sharesies has engaged in money laundering activity, but it has made a warning, and it said you need to do a better job of developing a system to verify who these customers are, what their identities are, and what they're using these platforms for. You have to carry out these proper checks. Now, the company has responded and said, yes, they've taken that matter seriously, and they'll put in place measures to address those issues. So, yeah, it means that even if you're a small investor, the rules apply to everyone. And so Sharesies is going to lift their game there.
And Nona, can you just give us a quick wrap of the markets?
Yeah. So our top 50 index, it rose 1% today. That's a 124-point gain to 13,064. Now, part of that was the Z Energy offer. So that share price is up 14% to $3.48 today. Another really strong contributor to that increase was Main Freight, and that's not surprising given, the additional transport and so forth in these lockdown levels. So fair enough. I guess that has been reflected in their share price. Now, the New Zealand dollar, it's steadily, it's still kind of weak at 68.4 US cents. 95.5 Australian, so holding fairly steady there, and 50.1 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with Business. Scan, 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 or if you can't do that, it's sign in with pen and paper. New rules are coming into force, making it mandatory to record your visit at most busy places or events. The change will snap into place a week after the alert level changes. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi went to see how it's going down.
Scanning is the new black, and it's about to become mandatory in most places you go. The new rules will mean everyone over the age of 12 must keep a record of where they've been at all alert levels by scanning their QR code or manually recording. That means businesses have to make sure they've got a record of people visiting and have QR codes and logbooks to help gather customers' details. QR scanning has been around since COVID emerged here, but scanning habits are very much a mixed bag in Auckland, even despite a level 4 lockdown and rising community cases.
I still scanned. Yeah, I've got a baby in NICU, so I'm in the thing of scanning everywhere I go.
And what are your friends and family like?
Yep, my daughter's the same. All the kids, I've told them, if we had another breakout, we'd need to know where the cases are, so just scan. Yeah. It's not hard.
I've tried to be consistent all the way through since last year, but definitely more conscious now too, of course.
I don't have a problem with that, although I don't have a phone that can take photos of it myself, so I fill everything in a little book. And then I've been doing that for over a year now, so it's become just habit for me.
Do you do it manually? You use the pen and paper?
I don't need to give other people my details.
I use the phone. I've actually got the app on my phone. Yeah. So you'll be able to.
That's a must, yeah. I use the phone as well. Just whenever I have it. If I don't have it, it's a must.
I think it is a must for everyone. I think it is because, coming down to this sort of pandemic like this, it is good to get aboard with everything and try to be on point with it. So I reckon it's good.
Yeah. No, a long time since I used it until we locked down again.
You scan in most places you go?
I don't even know what that is.
We're at one superette in Onehunga, where owner Sushila Patel says mandatory scanning is a no-brainer.
It's good for everybody, I reckon, scanning system. Yeah.
So you think it'll be pretty easy for businesses
easy for them. Like nowadays, mobile system have every, thing, so they just,
The farmer market greengrocer up the road echoes her enthusiasm.
They're very much into it, and we are always have one in, one out, not more than that.
She says 99% of customers use their phone, but for the other few, the manual sign-in is always in sight. Owner Chatel's got no issue with it being compulsory for businesses to make sure customers do the right thing.
100%, because it's my safety, my staff safety is more important, as well as my customer safety as well. And if they don't scan, I'll be in trouble, and I don't want to be in that trouble as well. Since we are into a supermarket, we need to be top off with everything.
Over the road at Binnan, Amisha Minhas is finding it frustrating to get customers to obey basic COVID rules.
Few customers, they're not wearing masks, not wearing gloves even. So we have put the signs out there. Now I moved it a bit further so they can all read it when they walk into the store.
Binnan has a person at the door to check people are scanning in, but she says if they're in charge of making sure people scan in, she's worried they could get some pushback.
Very tough, you know. I'm a bit worried now, you know, because if it continues for a few weeks.
Unikem Onihanga relies on the loyalty of regulars to scan in. About half of those visiting here prefer the pen and paper approach. Pharmacist Jane Yang says even before the latest outbreak, people seemed keen to scan in.
We still quite often see people scanning and people asking where our QR codes were. We still have the one on the door and there's also one at the front as well. So there's quite often people still scan, but they're not as often as now.
She, like other businesses around here, hope people use their common sense and scan in without being asked to.
And it's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, we'll talk to the COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins. Health authorities have been tracking down 6 people who were in an open walkway while the person with the earliest identified case of the Delta variant was in the lobby of the Crowne Plaza Hotel MIQ facility in Auckland. Andrew McRae reports.
Of the 6 members of the public, 4 have been identified using CCTV and 3 of them have returned negative tests. 2 are still to be identified and the police are assisting with this. The Ministry of Health says the atrium is sectioned off from the public in accordance with MIQ perimeter fencing standards. They're required to wear masks and keep 2 metres apart. Associate Health Minister Aisha Verrill says the chance of the virus jumping between the cordoned off areas is a hypothesis that needs to be tested.
Searching for alternative sources going through the staff testing hasn't turned anything up. Sometimes, despite extensive testing, we don't find the link, and so that may indeed be what happens in this case, despite everyone's best efforts.
She says all sources need to be investigated, no matter how surprising. The National Party says it's concerned about what potentially is a border leak at the Crowne Plaza in Auckland CBD. The shadow leader of the House, Chris Bishop, says the focus seems to be more about testing and tracing numbers than about how it happened in the first place.
I think everyone wants to know exactly what's happened. It's clear it's come from MIQ, it's clear it's come from the Crowne Plaza. The question is how, and of course the sooner we find out, the sooner we can plug any gap in our border system to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Chris Bishop says it must be treated as urgent. Viv Beck is the Chief Executive of Heart of the City in Auckland. She hopes that planning for Delta would have included the extra danger it poses for inner-city MIQ hotels.
I hope that has been done, including things like the suitability of walkways right by a facility. So my understanding is that this is being checked for completeness, but I think we clearly are dealing with something different now, and it is important that the facilities are geared up for that.
She believes hotels are still the best option for MIQ.
Many of the staff were able to be redeployed, the facilities existed, they were able to draw on police and military, etc. And I think while there is a discussion again now around purpose-built facilities away from the city centre, I haven't seen any analysis, it doesn't mean it's not there, but I haven't seen it that looks at not only the cost and benefit of purpose-built facilities, but I think it also needs to be thinking about access to staff, supplies, security, etc., etc.
A man whose partner was in the Crowne Plaza Hotel MIQ facility last year says at the time he was surprised how close it was to a public access way. Dominic Hartnett says initially there was a plywood barrier, but now it's perspex.
I could drop off stuff there, and it wasn't separated by perspex then, but obviously now it's separated. But yeah, people can walk through there. But yeah, I guess it's a little bit hard to block off.
He says it's a thoroughfare used by people to go to shops, restaurants and apartments. The walkway through the atrium is also used to access the vaccination centre. Josh Eyre received his first dose last week. He's not too concerned that he may have been at risk.
I was
wearing a mask and whatnot. So I think I was still doing sort of the right thing, so I think I'm okay, but there is still sort of that niggle of, oh, well, you know.
Josh Eyre does question having a vaccination centre near an MIQ facility, even though the risk is relatively low.
Having this location where, you know, we're trying to get people to come through to get vaccinated directly next to a place that does pose some minor risk is a little awkward. So sort of in that respect, it's like, well, could we have put the vaccination centre a little further away from the, you know.
The Ministry of Health says the public walkway does pass a fresh air area for returnees, but it's separated by fencing with Perspex panels and meets MIQ standards.
The Coromandel community is cautiously optimistic it may have dodged a COVID bullet, with widespread testing so far revealing no sign of the virus. About 60% of the local population is estimated to have been tested, but while wastewater testing has also come back negative, locals say that doesn't paint the whole picture. Nita Blake-Person reports.
In the small town of Coromandel, it's a case of so far, so good when it comes to COVID.
Cautiously optimistic is how I've been putting it this morning. Maybe he wasn't a spreader, I don't know, but somehow we might have escaped.
Josie Fraser is the co-owner of Umu Cafe, one of 9 locations of interest linked to a visit by the Devonport man whose COVID result kicked off this whole cluster. Her staff have so far all returned negative 5-day tests, but they know they're not in the clear just yet.
We've just got to wait for those day 12 tests and then we'll be sure.
Coromandel's testing turnout has been huge. The CEO of Māori health provider Te Korowai Hauora o Hauraki, Rihanna Manuel, estimates nearly 60% of the local community has had a swab.
With every day that goes by, we all breathe a sigh of relief, but we're all too aware that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday will mark the 12-day testing, and we're really just waiting to see the outcome of that.
Wastewater testing has also returned negative results, but Rihanna says while that's a comfort, it doesn't rule out the virus being in the community.
So the water supply here only caters for those people in the immediate township. Everybody past a certain point are on septic tanks, and so that won't be a total indicator of whether we're out of the woods either. Especially for those smaller communities like Manaia, Haratona, Tuateawa, up in Colville, Whangapaua and Kuaotunu, they're all on septic systems.
But it has been a remarkable rallying effort from locals who have not only turned out for swabs but for vaccines too. One of the testing centres has become a one-stop shop. After being swabbed, people are encouraged to head across the car park for a shot. Waikato DHB, which covers the Coromandel area, recorded more than 3,700 vaccinations on Sunday alone. And the people who are behind all that testing and swabbing have not gone unnoticed. Rihanna Manuel says in addition to community cat Helen Clark, who turns out day after day to keep them company, there's been dance challenges from testers, well wishes from those being tested, and of course donated kai.
The amount of food we've been delivered is probably not good. We need to walk a little bit further, I reckon.
Now the community wants to repay the favour. Ursula Magdalena Walsh is organising a whip around to collect money to buy cafe vouchers for frontline staff.
So as a nurse myself, I know how hard nurses work anyway. You know, I mean, I think they're doing an incredible job in a time like this, you know, especially in the pandemics, you know. So I just wanted to show that we care and we love them and we appreciate what they're doing.
Hundreds of dollars have been donated so far. It's a win-win for hard-hit cafes, which Umu owner Josie Fraser says also need a boost.
Definitely a scary time in terms of the business. We don't know what the repercussions are going to be. We, of course, don't know when we're going to go down a level, and I think it would be really premature to go down too quickly.
The level 4 lockdown will stay in place in Coromandel along with the rest of the country apart from Auckland until at least this Friday when the situation will be reviewed.
13,000 contacts in more than 300 locations of interest. The tentacles of the latest COVID-19 outbreak are continuing to spread right across Auckland and beyond. 35 new cases were announced today, all but 2 of them in Auckland, bringing the total to 107. Our reporter Chen Liu has more.
An athletics Auckland running event in Coromandel Park is one of the latest locations to be added to the Ministry of Health's ballooning list. Diane Craddock from the club says about 200 children and 40 adults attended the event on Saturday the 14th of August, but she's not too worried.
I think most people were behaving sensibly anyway, and we encouraged the use of apps, so hopefully several of them did that, but we definitely have lists via the clubs of all of the attendees who were there, so they can be easily contacted.
Diane Craddock says the club was notified this morning that the event was a location of interest, and she wants everyone to do the right thing and get tested.
We're just contacting people as and when we are able, and encouraging everyone to follow protocols.
The Auckland Performing Arts Centre in Western Springs, known as TPAC, is another new location of interest. Its executive director, Sarah Somerville, says only 5 people attended the affected dancing class on Friday, August the 13th.
We're identifying close contacts as quickly as we can and notifying them as quickly as we can, and that if any of the casual contacts are displaying symptoms, we will be encouraging them to go and get a test as well.
Sarah Somerville says the centre has a robust system to handle situations like this.
We're always concerned of the impact, not just for ourselves, but for everybody at the moment. We'll be taking all the necessary precautions. We'll be doing a deep clean of all our studios as well as our theatre space before we can consider opening again at level 2.
An Auckland church identified as a location of interest last week says the close contacts of a family who tested positive for COVID-19 have returned negative results so far. Michael Humphreys from the Church of Christ in Mount Roscoe says that's good news, but they are not out of the woods yet, with their day 12 tests coming up.
We're just waiting to see how it plays out. We expect the lockdown to continue for a lot longer than tomorrow. So we'll just have to keep our eye on things and see whether, as things progress, what we can do with people that need help.
The Samoan Assembly of God Church in Mangere is also in the spotlight. Anyone who is there on Sunday, the 15th of August, is being told to isolate and get tested. Church spokesperson Jerome Mika says they are working with the Ministry of Health and health providers to make sure that happens. South Seas Healthcare in Otara has set up a pop-up testing centre, and its chief executive, Silao Vaisola Sefo, says isolation will be tough for many members of the church community. He says they are trying to meet their wider needs beyond swabbing.
Blankets and food and hand sanitisers, masks, and also other social service supports.
The Ministry of Health is asking anyone who is at a location of interest at the specified times to call Healthline and get tested. Anyone with cold or flu symptoms should also call Healthline and get a test.
A South Island festival organiser says they're scrambling to work out how to enforce mandatory scanning if they're able to go ahead. Tess Brunton has more.
There's just 5 weeks to go before the 65th Alexandra Blossom Festival, and already the stress is mounting. Event manager Martin McPherson spent a sleepless night pondering how mandatory signing in will even work for his event, if the alert level allows it to go ahead. The Central Otago Festival attracts upwards of 15,000 people and runs along several blocks of the main street in Alexandra.
Apart from just putting tracer apps on every lamppost down the parade route and possibly going around having volunteers walking around with tracer apps, confronting people and asking them to sign in, I don't think there's any simple solution to this, and I can't for the life of me make it work to a figure of 100%.
He says the events industry will go out of its way to find solutions, but he's worried about having mandatory record keeping when they can't guarantee enforcement.
Especially in events which are highly managed by a volunteer base, people are going to walk away from it because it ends up being a too hard department. I haven't heard yet, and it's too early to say whether we can apply for an exemption, and that's what I'd probably be looking for, but I'm also looking at other colleagues in the industry to see how they're going to handle this, as we are one of the first events out of the blocks post-COVID. We could be seen as a test case.
He's planning to seek some advice from the government and the event industry. In Dunedin, Wolf Bar owner Josh Thomas says mandatory signing in seems like a no-brainer, especially with the number of locations of interest cropping up in the latest outbreak.
The reliance on people to have to look through those and
spot every location they may have been at seems painfully manual. So scanning in is the absolute key to, improving that and shortening future lockdowns.
He's hopeful it will help to speed up contact tracing and could reduce the need for lockdowns or limit their length. Managing and enforcing signing in is already on his mind.
When you run a bar, bad behaviour occasionally is just par of the course. So, having the odd person who's a bit of a dick about signing in or scanning in doesn't faze me at all. They can just bugger off to another bar as far as I'm concerned. And I'm beginning to think about maybe different ways, like the privacy angle is being discussed a lot at the moment. So I'm already thinking about different ways we could manage that.
Businesses that don't keep their contact tracing records up to scratch could face a fine varying between $300 and $1,000. Southland District Mayor Gary Tong says the burden shouldn't fall solely on businesses.
I find it a bit difficult for the business person to actually ensure that. It should be up to the individual that's using the premises. However, if a business person does see somebody hasn't, it's obviously worth a reminder. But there shouldn't be a pressure on the business person to ensure it's done. It should be up to the individual to get it done.
Mandatory record keeping will start 7 days after any alert level change, which allows more businesses to open their doors.
And some feedback on managed isolation facilities. Trudy's got in touch and says, "Hi Lisa, summer is coming. How about tents on Eden Park and the other sports grounds which have security fencing?" Interesting thought. Another person says the potential changing of levels on Fridays is super rough on restaurants. Zero opportunity to order food or drink for Saturday.
Ahi Mari e RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. The entire country will remain at alert level 4 until the end of next week. After meeting this afternoon, Cabinet has decided to extend the national lockdown until 11:59 p.m. this Friday. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says Auckland will remain in lockdown for longer, until 11:59 p.m. next Tuesday, taking the city's total number of days at alert level 4 to 14. Ms Ardern says as case numbers continue to rise, the safest option is to hold the course longer.
We don't yet believe we've reached the peak of this outbreak, or necessarily the edges of it. You'll recall that we pointed to early modelling suggesting we needed 8 to 10 days before we would hit a peak. We're on roughly day 6, so cases may continue to get worse before they get better.
Cabinet ministers will review Auckland's lockdown in 1 week and alert level settings for the rest of the country on Friday. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff backs the extension of the lockdown. He says no one believes the city could have come out of lockdown at this time.
13,000 contacts, probably 14,000 by now, over 300 places of interest. If you're going to beat this COVID outbreak, you've got to move really effectively and decisively.
Phil Goff says the lockdown is particularly hard for those with no work or living alone or separated from family. Meanwhile, greater separation between the North and South Island is being called for to help curtail the spread of the virus. Otago University public health expert Professor Nick Wilson says it's time for a greater emphasis on a regional approach. He says that means more controlled movement between the two main islands.
And that would mean improving the border so that essential workers aren't moving across on the ferry and in planes from the North Island to the South Island, so that we can be sure that there's absolutely no cases in the South Island and it can rapidly move down the alert level system.
Coromandel residents are cautiously optimistic they may have dodged a COVID bullet, but say they're not in the clear yet. There are 9 locations of interest in the area so far. Extensive swabbing and wastewater testing have returned negative results. The CEO of Māori health provider Te Korowai Hauora o Hauraki, Rihanna Manuel, says nearly 60% of the local population have had a swab and tested negative, which is encouraging.
With every day that goes by, we all breathe a sigh of relief, but we're all too aware that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday will mark the 12-day testing, and we're really just waiting to see the outcome of that.
Rihanna Manuel says many households are on septic tanks, so wastewater testing may not work. Officials are trying to hunt down 2 members of the public who could hold the answer to how COVID-19 spread out of a managed isolation facility and into the community. 6 people used an atrium walkway at Auckland's Crowne Plaza hotel. At the same time, a person with COVID-19 arrived in the building's nearby lobby. Of the 6, 4 have been identified. 3 of those have already returned negative tests and 1 is getting tested. Officials are working with the police to find the other 2. New Zealand's first group of evacuees from Taliban-controlled Afghanistan should be back in New Zealand tonight. Defence Minister Peeni Henare says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade says they were able to be evacuated with help from partners including Australia and the United Arab Emirates. The head of Z Energy says a $2 billion takeover offer is anything but a done deal. Australian fuel company Ampol, which owns local retailer Gull, is offering $3.78 a Z Energy share, 24% above its closing price last week. Z's chief executive Mike Bennett says his company has knocked back 3 lower offers, but the latest was high enough to let the Australian firm do a detailed study of its business.
And at the end of that period, we'll come back together with them and agree what is the best proposal that they can put forward. And we'll be able to take that to our shareholders if we think that's at a level that would be in our shareholders' interests.
Mike Bennett says it's likely Ampol would have to sell Gull to get approval from the competition regulator. Moving now into sport, the New Zealand Rugby Players Association expects a decision to be made tonight about where the rest of the Rugby Championship will be played. Players Association head Rob Nichol says he's confident it will mean the All Blacks will head to Perth later this week to play the 3rd Bledisloe Cup next weekend. New Zealand Rugby has come under fire from Rugby Australia and SANZAAR after the All Blacks didn't fly to Perth at the weekend as originally planned, citing uncertainty over how the tournament would play out amid COVID-19 situations in both countries. Nichols says the All Blacks risked being stuck in Perth with no rugby for 8 weeks, but he's confident a resolution will be found with either Brisbane or the United Kingdom having possibilities for hosting the tournament. The New Zealand women's cricket team have welcomed Susie Bates and Sophie Devine back into the fold ahead of their tour opener against England A in Derby. Bates is fit again after missing the majority of last season with a shoulder injury, while Devine has returned from a mental health break to captain the White Ferns. White Ferns coach Bob Carter says it's great to have them rejoin vice-captain Amy Satterthwaite.
It would be really nice to have Susie, Sophie and Amy all playing in the same team, which hasn't happened in a White Ferns team for perhaps nearly 30 months.
And in English Premier League football, Chelsea's beaten Arsenal 2-0. Manchester United were held to a 1-1 draw at Southampton and Tottenham beat Wolves 1-0. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Peter Lamp looks back on the weekend's sport, or maybe he laments the lack of it. Roland Pease has news of a great leap forward in the quest to harness energy from nuclear fusion. And Provincial Teenage Life with Mia Hollingworth and Emily Hargraves. One's from Invercargill, the other from a dairy farm near Waimate, offering thoughts on everything from climate change to aluminium smelters. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, cloudy periods and the odd shower, mainly fine about Auckland City. For the remainder of the North Island, generally fine with some cloudy areas, the odd shower about Taranaki, Kapiti and Wellington, and the chance of a shower for Waikato and the Central High Country tomorrow afternoon. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with periods of rain, easing to showers in the north this evening. Heavy falls about the ranges south of Ortira tomorrow. For Nelson, mostly cloudy with scattered showers today, isolated showers about the ranges tomorrow and fine breaks elsewhere. For Marlborough, occasional showers about the Sounds and inland ranges, fine elsewhere. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine with variable high cloud, but scattered rain about the main divide. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. The time is now 7 minutes past 6.
No mai, hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. If you're just joining us, the country will remain in a strict alert level 4 lockdown until at least midnight on Friday, whilst Auckland will be locked down until at least midnight next Tuesday, August 31st. At a press conference this afternoon, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said Delta had got a head start, and it was too early to say if the virus had spread outside of Auckland and Wellington. She suspended Parliament for a week. It comes as 35 new cases were revealed in the community today. 33 of those are in Auckland and 2 in Wellington. 7 people are now in hospital, but none are in ICU. But there are now over 300 locations of interest, the majority in Auckland, but some in the Coromandel and Wellington too. There are also more than 13,000 close contacts in isolation. These include hundreds of supermarket and Sky City casino workers. Now, this Delta outbreak has been linked to a returnee from Sydney who arrived on a flight from Sydney on August 7th after the Trans-Tasman bubble had been paused. Now, that person went straight into managed isolation and was transferred to hospital on August 16. Investigations are ongoing as to how that person transmitted the virus. Now, joining us now is COVID Response Minister Chris Hipkins. Tēnā koe, Minister. If we can start with the announcements today, please. So the South Island, if there are no cases on Friday, do you envisage that the South Island will go to level 3 or could it go lower than that?
Look, all possibilities are on the table. I wouldn't rule anything in or out. We'll obviously make those decisions based on what information we've got on Friday, what our testing results are showing us, what the contact tracing results are showing us. What we do know is that we have got a number of events that have taken place where people with COVID-19 have been at them, and the people from those have dispersed all over the country. And so, we're following the testing results and the contact tracing from those people very, very closely.
Besides a case, what would stop them going straight to level 2?
Look, I don't want to speculate at the moment. We'll do that based on
but
a risk assessment.
what things would you assess in order to determine if level 2 is actually a live option for them?
So what we'll be looking at is how many potential cases could there be out there in the community? How many contacts are there? Has there been movement of contacts in or out of the area during the time periods in question? Bear in mind that while we've been at level 4 for 6 days now, the first sort of 48 hours of that, the first 2 days of that, we still had quite a lot of movement of people up and down the country. So we will be looking to assess the risk.
Okay, what about Auckland? Could it go straight from level 4 to level 3?
Look, if you're talking about next Tuesday, again, That'll just very much depend on what happens with our testing results and our case numbers over the next few days. The modellers that we saw early on suggested that a sort of a 7 to 10 day period after the first cases detected is when we would expect to see we'd hit the peak of our case numbers. Obviously, we're at day 6 now, so we're still not at that period yet. We haven't seen the case numbers turning down yet, and obviously we'll be looking to see what we see by Tuesday.
Minister, is level 1 a thing of the past with Delta?
No, I definitely would not say that at this point. We're still pursuing an elimination strategy here. We're still aiming to stamp this outbreak out completely.
The Prime Minister said today that Delta's got a head start on us, right? And you've just said to me, we've got to be careful because a lot of people travelled out of Auckland back to their respective homes. Well, Nick Wilson told us earlier in the program that that was a mistake. You should have locked it down and not let people travel. What do you say to that?
I think we have to think about the practicalities. There are people who might have been
48 hours, though, Minister? You made the window too big, did you?
Oh, well, sometimes it's just logistics. It took us that long to get people out of Queenstown, and many of those people would have had nowhere to stay if they had to stay in Queenstown. So our advice to people was get home as quickly as you can, but there was a maximum time period involved there.
So you sacrificed the risk of spread for convenience?
Not for convenience, but yes, for practical purposes, in order to get people to a position where they can comply with self-isolation, we did need to give people a little bit of a notice period.
Reports that 17 of the 107 people infected are vaccinated. Have we vaccinated the wrong people then?
No, I don't think so. What we are seeing with this is that we've got a potentially younger age cohort here, it's just we've got about 1 million New Zealanders fully vaccinated now. That's good news, but we've still got a long way to go.
But not the majority of the people infected, because as you point out, they are younger. They are more mobile, but they were the lowest priority in terms of the government's rollout. Did you make a mistake?
No, not at all. We followed what's happening largely around the rest of the world as well, which is that you vaccinate the people who are at the highest risk first, and that is the people who are most likely to get it, which is those working at the border, those who are most likely to suffer an really adverse consequence if they get it, which is the elderly and those with what we call comorbidity, so other underlying health conditions.
So the Crowne Plaza, obviously all eyes on that because it seems to be the centre of the infection at the moment. This alleyway, this thoroughfare that's separated by perspex, is that still operational? Can people still walk down there?
At the moment, we've been emptying out the Crowne Plaza, and we won't.
Is the thoroughfare still able to be accessed by people going to their apartments or walking through that building? Is it still open to members of the public?
Well, I'm not sure, but at the moment we don't have anybody in the Crowne Plaza. So the Crowne Plaza has been being emptied out, and we won't be putting more people into it until we've had that thorough ventilation review.
Is it totally empty right now, Minister?
If it's not totally empty, it's very close to being totally empty. I haven't got the latest.
So you don't know if it's totally empty, and you don't know if the lane is still accessible. Since this outbreak, was that lane usable while there were still people in the hotel?
Look, I don't have that information.
Isn't that critical?
Look, I wouldn't rule in or out what may have happened there. My understanding is that there are barriers in place, but again, I haven't been there to personally look at what that is. There are thorough reviews going on of the ventilation aspects of that alleyway.
So is it time for the Crowne Plaza just to be shut down totally as an MIQ facility? Phil Goff says he's asked you to reconsider the position of some of these facilities. Should that be it for the Crowne Plaza?
I wouldn't say that at the moment. We're always looking at how we can continue to strengthen things. But unfortunately, the reality at the moment is that about 60% of our MIQ facilities are in the central city, in a central city somewhere. And if we were to say that we would shut all of them down, then effectively we would be stopping movement in and out of the country. And I don't think we are in a position to be able to do that. So we have to look at how we do it safely. We keep looking at how we can strengthen our protections there. But simply shutting down every hotel based on any perceived risk would mean there would be no MIQ and no one coming in at all.
So Jet Park recently, internal spread of the Delta variant. This is just from like 2 to 4 seconds with an open door, right?
That's my understanding. And
right,
again,
and also Crowne Plaza, same scenario where you had an affected person across the hallway, Minister, and somehow the family on the other side has become infected. Yes?
That is certainly the advice that we've got at the moment.
So given those scenarios and how you continually keep telling us how infectious this virus is, how is it that you had a lane down the side of the hotel where members of the public could walk through and the only thing protecting them from infected people was a perspex screen that didn't even go to the ceiling? How is that possible? Does that not beg a belief, Minister?
As I said, I haven't been to personally look at that site, so I can't comment specifically on that. There are very.
Are you comfortable with that scenario, Minister?
Well, there are very thorough infection prevention and control measures that are put in place. Our public health officials who have expertise in this area have reviewed all of our MIQ facilities thoroughly. Where an incident arises, they go back and they have another look to see whether there's more that can be done.
Had any concerns been raised about this prior to this outbreak?
My understanding was that there were some media queries about this about a week ago, but for the public health officials who do the MIQ audits had not raised this as a concern up until now.
So again, did Delta get a head start because we gave it a head start?
Well, no, because we can't form any conclusions at this point about what the linkage is between the case in the Crowne Plaza and the community cases. We do know that there is likely to be a link and that that's likely to be the source case, but at this point we haven't established exactly how that what it might have unfolded there.
In terms of vaccinations, are you going to have more of a max vaccination blitz, more opportunity for walk-ups? Again, something that Phil Goff has raised.
Well, one of the key things that we want is people making appointments, and we obviously want to maximise the use of our vaccines, which means getting people to make appointments and show up for their appointments when they make them. Walk-up vaccinations, particularly level 4 environment, have a level of risk around them because you've got people queuing for long periods of time and so on. So we would prefer to continue to operate a booking system, which means that we can manage the flow of people more accurately.
Minister, we're still getting arrivals from overseas, right? And they still need MIQ. Some of them are also infected and will need to go to quarantine. So at what point, what would force you to put a hold on incoming flights?
Look, that would be a very big step to take. No other country
And so
has
what
done
would
that.
see it happen?
Well, like I said, no other country has done that. We're obviously managing the number of arrivals at the moment because we've got a limited capacity to be able to accommodate people. That's already a pretty big constraint. We're accepting a fraction of the number of people coming into the country compared to the number of people who want to come into the country at the moment.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the COVID Response Minister, Chris Hipkins there. It is almost 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. What can we expect when this cluster's brought under control? Will life return to a relative new normal? Well, according to one expert, Delta's changed the landscape so much, the relative freedoms of the past 18 months may be a thing of the past. There are now 107 community cases of the highly infectious strain, 99 of those in Auckland and 8 of them in the capital. Well, joining me now is one of the government's advisors and COVID modeller, Rodney Jones. Good evening, Rodney. The Prime Minister has said we haven't seen the peak yet. What do you think the peak will look like?
See, you can't say that. There's hope from some modelers that we see it in the next 2 to 3 days. I think the next two to 3 days are really big days in terms of what do we see? Really pivotal days ahead of us. The risk is it runs on longer, and that would be my concern.
So when you say the next couple of days are pivotal, can you explain to people why that is?
Yeah, so let's say we find out tomorrow the cases are 15, for instance. Then we can start to sigh a kind of some, breath relief. That would be good news. If it climbs again, that means we're still on that exponential path. So that in these outbreaks, every day matters, and it kind of guides you to what sort of path you're on. And the next 2 days particularly are very important.
So we know that a huge number of people travelled, right? There was a 48-hour window of opportunity for people to get back to where they normally reside. So how do we factor those people, or you factor those people into modelling when we look at the fact that, at the moment we've got cases in Wellington and Auckland and no further, but we know people travelled extensively and have gone to the South Island and they are contacts?
Yeah, so that's why we have level 4. So even if someone has travelled and say a student has gone home or someone's travelled, that they will be sitting at home. So that's not such a big concern. The concern is more the outbreak in the communities in Auckland. To what extent is it affecting essential workers? And the lists say it is, who have to stay mobile for our society to function. So that's the much bigger risk here. People who have travelled to different places or are at level 4 till Friday, those cases will appear. What really matters is Auckland and to a lesser extent Wellington.
So just talking to the Minister there about what happens on Friday, particularly with the rest of the country outside Auckland, do you think in terms of what you see with modelling, it would be realistic to go from a level 4 straight to a level 2, or would we really need to pass through level 3 on the way?
Oh, you'd probably want a level 3. It's the weekend. We can then reassess at the start of next week. But again, I think this battle, if you like, is going to be fought out in Auckland, as it has been previously.
Yeah. So in terms of life with Delta, how is it different, or how will it be different for us in terms of whether we can return to level 1 or whether we're perpetually stuck in a scenario that looks a bit like level 2? How has Delta changed the game here?
Well, it's changed the game completely. And in hindsight, once we have cases in the country, I think that's more important than digging into the specifics of how it actually happened, is accepting there will be breaks. Once you see cases in MIQ rising, you're at risk. That was the case the year ago, last July, ahead of August, and it was the case leading into this outbreak. So we may have to consider, until we're vaccinated, staying at a level 2, for instance. That now the race is to get vaccinated, get to the end of the year, but before we can do that, we have to get through this outbreak.
So if we are reliant on vaccination rates to get out of level 2, what would be the appropriate vaccination rate to drop to level 2? How much coverage would you need?
Well, where you run into it, if you vaccinate everybody over 12, you still only get to about 78% of the country. So the next step is going to be, do we vaccinate those up down to the age of 5 if their parents are happy them taking it? We're going to need more than 80% across the whole country, because what we've seen is, Israel at the moment at 60%. They've just been going through a big outbreak with hospitalizations up a lot. The UK's at 73%, and they're still having death rates that we couldn't live with in New Zealand. So we're going to have to look at ways for getting it as high as physically possible.
And could we achieve 80% coverage as a percentage of the entire population without going down to 5 years old?
Probably not. We'll probably get stuck in the high 70s or the mid 70s right now, because there are people who are going to refuse to take it or won't take it. That's our next battle, is how do we get the vaccination rates super high that you need for this virus.
So just returning to my initial question to you about what a peak looks like, right, what the peak looks like. The Prime Minister said today that there's a reproduction rate of about 6 to 1. So is there any way to know round about how many cases we're staring down the barrel of here?
Yeah, so I actually don't agree with the argument that the reproduction rate is so high. I think it's probably the same as it was. The difference is that this virus transmits in a shorter time. So previously it was 7 days, now it's 4 days. So that's how you get such a high number. It looks like 6, but it could actually be the same. It's just got a faster generation time.
And what would that number be, Rodney, if it was the same? What have we been experiencing?
Yeah, so you create a similar path. You kind of don't want, we are in level 4. So the previous path took us like New South Wales. Without a lockdown, we would have been hitting to, that number like 1,000 cases a day. We're not going to do that because we're already in a lockdown. And so the question is, where does the curve bend? And the hardest thing in this whole pandemic is identifying when curves bend. We just don't know, and there's no way of really doing it. It's kind of a little bit of guesswork.
Really good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. That is Rodney Jones, who is a COVID-19 modeller. As the COVID crisis across New South Wales and Victoria worsens, other states are feeling jittery about the plan to reopen. The Prime Minister says a return to COVID zero is now highly unlikely. But Scott Morrison insists the country is still on track to reopen under the 4-stage plan agreed to by National Cabinet last month. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
Sydney man Tom Raw has booked a flight home to Perth to see his family for Christmas. But as the days go by, he feels like it's less and less likely he'll get there.
Given sort of WA's stance on things, it's sort of not looking likely we'll be able to get back and see our family at Christmas time, I would imagine, unless something changes.
WA has no COVID cases, and Premier Mark McGowan wants to keep it that way, leaving the option of lockdowns and border closures on the table, even once the 80% vaccination target is reached.
I think we all want to be able to travel to every state in our country. And we all want to, if we don't live in our own home states, we want to go home and see family.
The Prime Minister is urging states to stick to the roadmap agreed to at National Cabinet last month. It says once the vaccination rate reaches 70% and then 80%, stringent lockdowns and border closures would be unlikely. But as the New South Wales COVID outbreak worsens, some states are getting jittery about those parameters. Terry Slevin is the Chief Executive of the Public Health Association of Australia.
It's very clearly going to be a difficult decision for jurisdictions that have little or no caseload to throw open their borders with an expectation that vaccination alone will provide protection to their population.
But he says once that 80% vaccination target is met, the country will need a plan for a staged, careful reopening, which includes opening state borders.
What we need to do is push for as nationally consistent an approach as we can, but allowing for the use of local tools and circumstances to respond appropriately in the local circumstance.
And he's clear Australia should not follow the Freedom Day model from the UK.
Freedom Day in Australia would be Disaster Day in Australia. It genuinely comes down to that. It's not as simple as that, and I'm afraid a lot of those very simplistic slogans really just dupe us into a false sense of security.
But as for interstate reunions at Christmas...
This is a very personal question for me, Rachel. I've got family both in Sydney, Newcastle and in Western Australia. And I would love to be able to plan with confidence seeing them this Christmas. But the truth is, I haven't even thought of that as a prospect. I'm optimistic that we can be together in Christmas 2022. Anything much before that, you're rolling the dice.
It's a prospect that Tom Raw is slowly coming to grips with about his home state of WA.
Because they are living life as normal at the moment, I don't reckon they'll open up. So hopefully I can move the flight to a later date successfully.
Let's go to some of your feedback now before we head off. On the level changes, potential level changes on Friday, this person is saying they might as well keep it at level 4 for the weekend. I have a wedding booked for Saturday. It may drop to level 2 for Saturday, but we still will have to cancel as we won't have the opportunity to prep our order for them. Poor couple, they say. Kimberly, who's been listening on our Facebook live stream, says there are people in the South Island who are still waiting for results of their COVID tests from last week, and so reckons we do need to stay in level 4 in the South Island as well. You can't jump in and out of levels, as Bruce Smith is inferring, referring to our earlier interview. Someone else has raised concerns about the exercise areas at the Crowne Plaza and suggesting that there may be a stairwell there that is open to the public who have access to the car park. Well, that is one that we will also follow up on. Our Nights and Lately will keep you updated throughout the evening. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a popo, and tomorrow from 5 a.m. that is, First Up speaks to a renowned architect who's come up with a plan to turn a former leper colony into a scenic managed isolation facility. We're back tomorrow.
RNZ News at 6:30. Here are your headlines. All of New Zealand will remain in lockdown for at least another 4 days, with 107 COVID-19 cases in the current cluster. Cabinet has decided, however, to keep Auckland in alert level 4 for longer, until 11:59 p.m. next Tuesday. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff backs the longer lockdown extension for the city. A public health expert calls for greater separation between the North and South Islands to help curtail the spread of the virus. And the first group of evacuees from Taliban-controlled Afghanistan should be back in New Zealand tonight. Those are your headlines. Our next news is at 7.
The bombing of the Rainbow Warrior.
The entire floor had sort of erupted.
The kidnapping of baby Kahu.
He lifts baby Kahu and just takes off with her.
The murder of Teresa Cormack.
A 6-year-old child being abducted and murdered. It doesn't get any worse.
Hear from people connected to some of our most notorious criminal investigations in Crimes NZ, hosted by me, Jesse Mulligan. A brand new batch of episodes is available now. Find them on the RNZ website, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts.
Thanks, Jesse. And I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. Hope you're all keeping well and safe and reasonably calm in your bubbles, wherever they might be.